Chapter 38. Lien Rufing's face suddenly changed, and he subconsciously threw himself to one side. Boom! A jet-black arrow shot out. Although one of the guards blocked the attack with his saber, the arrow suddenly exploded when it collided with him. The guard let out a blood-curdling scream as his entire body exploded into pieces. Lien Rufing and the others' faces changed again. The arrow was not only fast, but also extremely powerful. It had an unimaginable explosive power, which could not be blocked at all. "The enemy is over there," a guard roared, pointing to the distance of the village. Lien Rufing immediately saw a figure flashing on the top of a stone house in the village. The figure was vaguely familiar. Lin Sun? Lien Rufing's pupils shrank. Was it the 13-year-old boy? Go! With no time to think, Lien Rufing shouted and rushed into the village first. The terrain of the village was complicated, and there were many places to hide, which made it difficult for the archer to exert his power. It was not like outside the village, where there was no place to hide and could only be exposed to the air as a live target. These guards were all experienced in fighting, so they naturally knew the reason. They all rushed into the village with Lien Rufing. In the distance, Wu Henshui witnessed all this with a livid face. How could he expect such a powerful archer was hiding in such a small village? "Elder Wu, the arrow is extremely powerful. It seems to be not an ordinary weapon. If I guessed right, the arrow should be inscribed with the explosive flame spiritual tattoo," a middle-aged man nearby said in surprise. This was Han Junshan, a capable subordinate of Wu Henshui, who had the cultivation of the 4th level of martial realm. What was more, Han Junshan was an apprentice of spiritual tattooist. Although Han Junshan had long lost the hope of becoming a spiritual tattooist due to his poor aptitude, he had studied spiritual tattoos, so he still had good eyesight. Explosive flame spiritual tattoo? Wu Henshui's heart skipped a beat. You mean there is a spiritual tattooist in the village? Han Junshan shook his head. I don't think so. Explosive flame spiritual tattoo is only one of the basic spiritual tattoos. I am sure I can inscribe it, but what? Wu Henshui asked. The quality of spiritual ink needed to inscribe this explosive flame spiritual tattoo is extremely strict. Moreover, it is inscribed on an arrow. Such an arrow can be sold for 30 copper coins in Donglin town. It's hard for me to imagine how such a poor place could have such a precious thing. Han Junshan frowned. That was what puzzled him. Wu Henshui's eyelids twitched. You mean, there are masters in the village? After that, he shook his head and denied it. No, if there's an expert, there's no need for them to hide here and ambush us. According to my judgment, the opponent's combat strength shouldn't be strong, and that's why they would act in this way. Han Junshan nodded and said, That's what I think too. He must have consumed a lot of his energy with the arrows just now. If we can seize the opportunity now, we can definitely take him down. Wu Henshui thought of something and said, In this way we may know the origin of these arrows. Maybe we can make a fortune. Han Junshan smiled cooperatively. Exactly. Who would have thought that there are dozens of acres of good spiritual fields, a good place to hide blood marrow grits, and even treasures like explosive flame arrows in this poor little village? Wu Henshui took a deep breath and said coldly, That's good. When Lien Rufing and the other bumpkins get rid of their opponents, everything will be in our pocket. Han Junshan asked, Elder Wu, shouldn't we go and help them? Wu Henshui sneered and looked at the village in the distance. He said leisurely, The son of a noble family should not sit under the eaves. It's better to leave it to those bumpkins. Feiyun village was not large, but the streets were winding and messy. The houses in the village were not uniformly planned and were built in disorder like a spider web. If a person wanted to hide in the houses, it was not easy to be found. Unless a strong practitioner above the gang's spirit realm came, he could locate the hidden trace in a flash with his strong mind. Otherwise, he could only search by feeling and eyesight when he entered the village. Lin Sun was not worried about this. He knew that his opponents were all strong practitioners in the martial realm. That was why he moved all the villagers out of the village in order to kill Lien Ruffung and the others with the help of the intricate terrain. In this way, he didn't have to worry about Lien Ruffung threatening him with the villagers' lives. Who at this moment, Lin Sun was hiding in a house. He took out a water bag and gulped it down while gasping for breath. The water bag contained spiritual refining liquid, which could quickly replenish his spiritual energy. Although he only shot 3 arrows just now, it consumed more than half of his spiritual energy. Thanks to the fact that he had just reached the 3rd level of martial realm and refined by the spiritual vortex, his spiritual energy had been condensed to the extreme. It would have been impossible for him to do this in the past. Feeling the spiritual energy in his body gradually recovering, Lin Sun looked calm, but in his heart he felt pity. Just now, he wanted to kill Lien Ruffung by surprise, but he failed in the end. Thinking of this, the figure of Wu Henshui came to Lin Sun's mind. He didn't know this old man with a goatee, but his intuition told him that this old guy was more dangerous than Lien Ruffung. What on earth is he after that Lien Ruffung brought such a strong practitioner back? Lin Sun frowned. He knew that today was going to be troublesome. He thought he was just going to deal with Lien Ruffung and the others, but now there was a dangerous man of unknown origin, which made Lin Sun feel pressured. Soon, the spiritual energy in his body recovered to its original state. The abundant strength refreshed Lin Sun and drove all the distracting thoughts out of his mind. Lin Sun took off the white bone big bow and replaced it with the sky breacher. He took a deep breath and flashed out of the room like a nimble leopard cat. The fight had begun, and Lin Sun was doomed to die. There was no time for Lin Sun to think about anything else. The village was no longer peaceful. Footsteps and shouts sounded from time to time, which indicated that Lien Ruffung and the others were trying their best to find Lin Sun. 3 dead, 12 to go. The most dangerous one is the old man with a goatee. Lien Ruffung can't underestimate him. Lin Sun calculated quickly as he sneaked through the alleys of the village cautiously. When Lin Sun came to the corner of an alley, he suddenly stopped, and a touch of coldness flashed in his eyes. Although he didn't hear any sound, Lin Sun sensed that danger was approaching. Holding his breath, Lin Sun quickly approached the corner and waited. Silently, the figure of a guard appeared, light and alert. He held a saber in one hand and a shield in the other, fully alert. When Lin Sun saw his opponent, the guard also saw Lin Sun. The distance between them was only 1 meter. Swish! With a flash of green light, Lin Sun used the heavy chop of the chop formula without hesitation. The momentum of the saber was like a mountain. The guard reacted quickly. With a roar, he moved forward instead of retreating. He raised his shield to block, and at the same time, the long saber in his right hand stabbed out. Boom! However, the guard had underestimated Lin Sun's strength. With a loud bang, the shield in his hand shattered, and his whole body was hit by a huge force. With a bang, he flew out and hit the opposite wall. His head tilted to one side, and he fell to the ground, unable to get up again. Puff! Without any delay, Lin Sun leaped forward and stabbed his opponent's throat. With a swish, blood spurted out. But Lin Sun had already swooped down like a cheetah. He tiptoed on the ground, turned around, and disappeared in the alley. The opponent was only at the 2nd level of martial realm, which was no threat to Lin Sun. Therefore, this sudden confrontation was a clean win for Lin Sun. When Lin Sun disappeared, someone heard the news and saw the guard's body on the ground, roaring angrily. Not long after, the same scene occurred again in the other corner of the village. A guard was carefully moving forward, but a blade suddenly rushed down from the wall and slashed his head in half. He didn't even have the time to scream before he fell to the ground, never to get up again. Like a ghost, Lin Sun disappeared again. As early as a few days ago, Lin Sun had walked through every corner of Feiyun village, imprinting every possible hiding place in his mind in order to deal with the current situation. In this case, Lin Sun was waiting for the right moment, while Lien Ruffeng and others were totally unprepared. They were caught unprepared at once. As time went by, Lien Ruffeng and others' faces became gloomy. Their hearts were filled with unspeakable anger and fear. First, they were killed by arrows at the entrance of the village, and then they entered the village and started a street fight. No matter how stupid Lien Ruffeng and others were, they knew the enemy had prepared for all this. A quarter of an hour later. Elder brother Lien, the villagers are not here. We can't threaten them with their lives. This is obviously a trap. A guard said in a low voice with fear on his face. Of course I know that. Lien Ruffeng looked at the remaining 6 people around him, feeling very agitated. Realizing the situation was not good, he gathered his scattered subordinates together. However, he did not expect that 5 more people would be killed in just a quarter of an hour. Including Lien Ruffeng, there were only 7 people left in the village. Lin Sun. Lien Ruffeng gnashed his teeth with hatred. By this time, he had completely understood that there was only one opponent, the thin 13-year-old boy. But Lien Ruffeng did not expect that the boy, whom he had never taken seriously, would change into another person after a few months. He was cunning, cruel, and incredibly powerful. Obviously, the disappearance of Lu Ting and Qian Qi was caused by Lin Sun. Shurao Tianren, that old bastard, where did he find such a cruel little thing? Lien Ruffeng figured it out. Buzz. Suddenly, the familiar strange whistling sound came from afar again. It was the sound of something tearing through the air. Chapter 39. Despite his anger, Lien Ruffeng and his fellows had to dodge to one side. Boom. The arrow was like a waterfall, exploding a big pit on the ground. Dirt splashed everywhere, making Lien Ruffeng and his fellows covered in dirt. Wang Zhuan, Xiao Shi, you two go to Elder Wu for help. Lien Ruffeng roared. His face was ferocious, and he was furious at Wu Henshui's inaction. Your life is valuable, but mine is not? What kind of F***king situation was this? Were they still not going to make a move? Did they really want to wait for all of them to die? Wang Zhuan and Xiao Shi also knew the situation was serious, so they hurried away. Brother Lien, what should we do? Someone asked. Wait. We can't take the initiative anymore. That boy is as cunning as a ghost. He won't fight face to face. Only a master like Elder Wu can defeat him. Lien Ruffeng took a deep breath and said coldly. He would not risk his life again. If he died, everything would be over. As for what Wu Henshui would think, Lien Ruffeng didn't care. The others heaved sighs of relief in their hearts when they saw this. Truthfully speaking, up until this point in the battle and watching their companions die successively, they'd been terrified as well. Everyone was waiting for Wu Henshui's help. As time went by, the atmosphere in the village became more and more bleak. A gust of wind blew, stirring up a pile of fallen leaves and bringing the smell of blood. Lien Ruffeng suddenly had a bad feeling. The distance from the village to the entrance was less than a few miles. Even if he walked step by step, half an hour would be enough. But now there was no news at all. Was there an accident? When this thought flashed in his mind, Lien Ruffeng's heart suddenly tightened, and an indescribable panic arose in him. Let's go and have a look together. Lien Ruffeng gritted his teeth and left with his fellows. He could not wait to die like this anymore. The village he was so familiar with now seemed so strange, like a place of the dead. It was chilling. Before long, Lien Ruffeng and his fellows stopped at the entrance of an alley. In the shadow of the alley there were 2 dead bodies. One had his chest broken, and the other's throat was crushed, and his head was twisted and soft. The 2 bodies were Wang Zhuan and Xiao Shi, who had gone to ask for help. Lien Ruffeng and his fellows felt like falling into an ice cave. 2 more dead. Run! One of the guards seemed to be unable to endure this kind of stimulation, and with a maddened roar, he rushed out of the village. Come back! Lien Ruffeng's expression changed abruptly. However, it was already a step too late. With a bang, an arrow shot out from the leaves of an old locust tree in the distance, instantly killing the guard. Another comrade had died in front of him, just a few 100 feet away. Lien Ruffung looked ferocious and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This was too much. Kill! Kill that little bastard for me! Lien Ruffung roared and rushed to the old locust tree in the distance like a madman. He had already seen Lin Sun chase. The remaining 3 guards hesitated for a moment, but in the end they gritted their teeth and followed. I was careless. At the entrance of the village, Wu Henshui and Han Junshan walked side by side. Along the way they found many corpses. Experienced as they were, they could tell from the wounds that the enemy was not as simple as they had imagined. Indeed, the enemy has obviously been preparing for a long time. Taking advantage of the village terrain, he adopted the strategy of breaking through one by one. Sneak attack, snipe, breakthrough. He didn't confront Lien Ruffung at all. But there is no doubt that this strategy is the most suitable. Han Junshan said in a low voice, I didn't expect to meet such a cunning and ruthless person in this remote village. Anyway, he is just one person. I'd like to see who he is. How could he have such a scheming, ruthless, and meticulous mind? But in my opinion, his cultivation should not be higher than the 5th level of martial realm, otherwise he would have killed Lien Ruffung first instead of waiting until now. Wu Henshui's expression was indifferent as he walked forward leisurely. He seemed extremely relaxed, but his shoulders were slightly arched and his eyes were like lightning. His aura was condensed and did not dissipate. It was obvious that he was ready to fight. Elder Wu, we have suffered a heavy loss this time. Han Junshan frowned. You think too much. I won't let such an opponent go. If he is alive, I won't be able to sleep well in the future. Wu Henshui said indifferently. Han Junshan nodded. That's right. At this time, Wu Henshui suddenly raised his head. With eyes as sharp as an eagle's, he pointed to the distance and said, The enemy is over there. Clang. Han Junshan pulled out a huge black sword, full of killing intent. Seeing this, Wu Henshui heaved a long sigh. Since I reached the 8th level of martial realm, and became the deacon of the medicine house in Green Sun Tribe, I rarely have the chance to fight by myself. This time, I hope the opponent is not too weak. Han Junshan smiled and said, Elder Wu, leave it to me this time. Such an opponent is not worthy for you to fight. Wu Henshui glanced at him and said, All right. Their words showed that they didn't take Lin Sun seriously at all. They were extremely confident. They did have the capital to be proud. One was on the 8th level of martial realm, the other was on the 4th level of martial realm. Besides, the cultivation methods they practiced were far superior to the villagers like Lien Ruffung. Under such circumstances, there was only one way to deal with an enemy who hadn't reached the 5th level of martial realm. No matter how cunning the enemy was, in the face of absolute power, there was only one way to choose: death. However, just as the two of them were about to take action, they suddenly noticed that a small and delicate figure had appeared on the street several 100 feet away. This figure wore a black beast skin cloak, and the hood covered his face, only revealing a small section of his fair and delicate chin. His skin was glistening, and when contrasted with the black cloak, he actually had a breathtaking feeling. She was obviously a very young girl, but standing in the middle of the street at this time, Wu Henshui and Han Junshan both felt an indescribable horror in their hearts. When they saw that the little girl was holding a 3-meter-long spear that was completely white and suffused with a chilly and hazy starlight, the expressions of the two of them couldn't help but change drastically. A spiritual weapon. The breath from the white-boned spear was so strong that it couldn't be possessed by an ordinary weapon. Was this little girl a practitioner in Gang Spirit Realm? Thinking of this, even Wu Henshui and Han Junshan felt it absurd. How could a little girl have such a cultivation? Or, this spiritual weapon didn't belong to her? Thinking of this, Wu Henshui's heart skipped a beat, and a touch of passion surged in his eyes. After the little girl appeared, she just stood there, her slim figure bathed in the bloody twilight, adding a trace of mystery to her. She didn't move. But Wu Henshui and Han Junshan knew clearly that the little girl was here to stop them. Go, test out this little girl's background. Wu Henshui winked at Han Junshan. It was obviously abnormal that a little girl with a spiritual weapon suddenly appeared in this weird village. Out of caution, Wu Henshui chose to wait and see. Little girl, get out of the way. Han Junshan was not a fool. He naturally knew that the little girl's appearance was strange, so he tested her with words. The little girl shook her head and didn't speak. Han Junshan's heart sank. The little girl was really here to stop them, which made him inexplicably nervous. He couldn't tell why he was so vigilant against a child, but years of battle experience told him that it was absolutely right to be careful. If you don't get out of the way, don't blame me for killing you. Han Junshan's killing intent was revealed, and his eyes were as sharp as a knife. He stepped forward with the black giant sword in his hand, looking as powerful as a mountain. He was a master in the aperture opening realm, the 4th level of martial realm. His acupoints were full of qi, and when he ran his body, the momentum generated was like a wolf and a tiger, extremely frightening. Swish! Before he finished his words, the little girl seemed to feel the killing intent. She suddenly raised her head, revealing a pair of beautiful black crescent eyes, but the eyes were full of indifference and no emotion. What? Han Junshan felt that his whole body trembled under the gaze, as if a sharp sword was pointed at his throat, and his heart was filled with endless fear. The next moment, he only felt that his eyes were blurred, and wisps of beautiful and clear starlight suddenly appeared, like a dream, an illusion, a magnificent dream. Han Junshan was in a trance. So beautiful! Almost at the same time, he heard a thunderous shout, "Watch out!" Han Junshan was confused. Watch out? Puff! Before he could react, he felt a pain in his throat, and his whole body flew out as if he had been hit by a huge mountain. Han Junshan finally came to his senses, but it was too late. He only felt that his eyes went black, and the world instantly fell into endless darkness. The wisp of dreamy and gorgeous starlight suddenly vanished as well. Wu Henshui felt cold all over, and his clothes were soaked in cold sweat. Just at that moment, he saw Han Junshan stand there stupidly, as if he was possessed. Without any reaction, his throat was easily pierced by the white-boned spear in the little girl's hand. It was so fast that Wu Henshui had no time to save him. It was too terrible, and the scene was too strange. A 5- or 6-year-old girl, holding a spear, killed a master in the 4th level of martial realm in an incredible way. Wu Henshui couldn't imagine it. Because he couldn't imagine it, he was frightened by the scene, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At this moment, Wu Henshui completely lost his confidence. Even the cultivation of the 8th level of martial realm couldn't bring him a sense of security. He forgot about the blood-marrow grit, forgot about devouring the spiritual fields, and forgot about dealing with the archer. He just wanted to leave. This place was too horrible, with unimaginable dangers everywhere. It was not a remote village, but a land of death. Without any hesitation, Wu Henshui turned around and fled. But in the blink of an eye, he felt a sharp pain in his back, and then he flew out. Everything went black, and he completely lost consciousness. There was no time to react or dodge. Everything happened in a flash. Under the setting sun, Xia Ji, in a black cloak, came to Wu Henshui and frowned. She found that this blow didn't kill him completely, which made her a little dissatisfied. When she was about to give another blow, she suddenly heard a triumphant and cruel laughter in the distance. Was Lin in danger? Chapter 40. In the northwest corner of Feiyun village. It was a row of old houses that had fallen into disrepair. When Lin soon appeared here, he knew he was surrounded and had nowhere to retreat. At the intersection, 3 guards surrounded him in a triangular formation. They all looked ferocious and their eyes were full of hatred and killing intent. Behind the intersection, Lien Rufeng was waiting with a long saber in his hand. Lin Sun could not escape even if he had wings. But there was not a trace of nervousness on his face. There was even a smile on his lips, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Lin Sun knew it would be a fierce fight as early as the beginning of the battle. Fortunately, there were only Lien Rufeng and 3 other guards left, and the dangerous old man with a goatee did not show up. Lien Rufeng laughed, but his smile was grim and ferocious. "Why don't you run away, you little bastard?" Lin Sun smiled, and with a sudden push of his toes, he twisted his body and rushed to Lien Rufeng, exposing his back. The 3 guards behind were stunned for a moment, and then they were overjoyed and rushed to Lin Sun with their swords. Clang! The guard with a short axe rushed to Lin Sun first. But to his surprise, Lin Sun's figure, which was originally rushing forward, suddenly stagnated as if he was frozen. Then his arched back sprang up like a spring, and he suddenly spun in the air. Whoosh! With a sound of saber, Lin Sun's sky breacher rolled back and drew a semicircle in the air. From a distance, Lin Sun and his saber became one, spinning in the air like a top, and the blade rolled up thousands of waves. This was the whirl of the 6-word saber play. With the saber as the blade, it rotated like a whirlpool, which was the most treacherous and ruthless. Puff! The guard's arms holding the short axe were cut off by the whirlpool. He could not stop his body from rushing forward and hit the whirlpool of the blade. His head was cut off and thrown away in an instant. Blood splashed everywhere. It was a ghastly scene. The 2 guards behind Lin Sun were a little late. Seeing this scene, they were scared out of their wits and hurriedly dodged to one side. But Lin Sun was already like a rainbow flashing in the sky. He launched a surprise attack with his saber. Swish! 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 Bastard! Lien Rufeng, on the other side, dashed forward with a ferocious look on his face. His breath was raging, and his long saber was as fast as lightning. He didn't expect that Lin Sun would turn around and point his spear at the 3 guards behind him. For Lien Rufeng, this kind of diversion tactic was nothing. But he didn't expect that Lin Sun was still so brave and fierce in close combat. Lin Sun killed one of his men with one saber strike, leaving him no chance to rescue his men. Seeing that Lin Sun was attacking the other 2, Lien Rufeng could no longer hold back his anger and rushed to Lin Sun. Woo-woo! The long, narrow and dark blade was like a poisonous snake coming out of its hole, rubbing against the void and making a ghostly wail and wolf-like howl. It went straight to Lin Sun's back. This attack was shrewd and cunning. If Lin Sun wanted to save his life, he had to give up the attack on the 2 guards. To Lien Rufeng's surprise, Lin Sun seemed to be unaware of it. Instead of dodging, he kept chasing after a guard. He was courting death. Lien Rufeng was overjoyed. How could he miss such an opportunity? He slashed at Lin Sun's back with the blade in his hand. Bang! Although the saber hit, there was no bloody scene as expected. Instead, it made a harsh sound as if it hit a steel plate. Oh no, the little bastard was wearing armor! Lien Rufeng's heart thumped and his face changed. At this time, Lin Sun had already accelerated like a cannonball with the help of the shock force of his saber. At the same time, the saber in his hand poured down like a cyan waterfall. With a puff, the head of a guard was cut off. Crash! The headless body of the guard fell to the ground with a loud crash. Lin Sun's face suddenly turned pale, and he almost coughed up blood with a sweet taste in his throat. But with a flash of ruthlessness in his eyes, he forced himself to endure it and rushed to the last guard. The last guard had already been shocked by the change in front of him. Seeing Lin Sun rushing towards him, he roared and fled to the distance regardless of anything. This scene stunned Lin Sun and Lien Rufeng. It seemed that they didn't expect that Lien Rufeng would run away. Lien Rufeng was so cowardly. "You are the last one." Lin Sun gasped and looked at Lien Rufeng. Up to this point, Lin Sun had consumed a lot of his spiritual energy. If he hadn't replenished himself with the spiritual refining liquid from time to time, he would have died long ago. After all, he was at the third level of martial realm. No matter how pure and vigorous his spiritual energy was, it was still limited. Lin Sun suffered a serious internal injury after being hit by Lien Rufeng's saber. Under such circumstances, the fact that Lin Sun could still hold on made Lien Rufeng's heart palpitate. If it were him, he wouldn't have been able to hold on until now. But the young man was still standing, blood dripping from the blade in his hand, and the killing intent all over his body showed no sign of weakening. How could a young man at the third level of martial realm be able to do this? Lien Rufeng couldn't figure it out, but he could see that Lin Sun had consumed a lot of his spiritual energy. It was not an exaggeration to say that Lin Sun was at the end of the fight, which made him feel a little relieved. Just me alone is enough to take your life. Thoughts flashing in his mind, Lien Rufeng didn't slow down. He strode forward with a fierce momentum and slashed at Lin Sun with his long saber. Compared with Lin Sun, he didn't consume much physical energy since the beginning of the fight. He was at the peak of his momentum. Most importantly, his cultivation was much higher than Lin Sun's. Swish! The long saber splashed, and the spiritual energy gathered, dazzling. Lien Rufeng hated Lin Sun to the core, so he wouldn't give him a chance to breathe. Bang, bang, bang. Within a few breaths, the two had fought dozens of times. Lin Sun's face was getting paler, but his saber skills were not disordered. Every move was as delicate as an antelope's horn. His spiritual energy was running out, but he still had the strength of flesh and blood. With the subtle understanding of six-word saberplay, he could resolve all the attacks with entanglement. Entanglement was the art of detour. Entanglement was the art of subduing the enemy with skill and using his strength to fight back. It was like using a small amount of force to overcome a strong force. At this time, Lin Sun's entanglement was like a silkworm spinning silk in spring. It was as slow as the spring rain and as rustling as the river waves. The key was to use the enemy's strength to fight back. Lien Rufeng's face grew gloomier. He felt that Lin Sun was like a slippery loach, making his every move feel like hitting in a swamp. What kind of saberplay was this? Lien Rufeng had been traveling between Feiyun Village and Green Sun Tribe since he started his cultivation. He had even been to Donglin City, where he had seen many powerful practitioners and martial arts. But he couldn't find a martial art as mysterious as Lin Sun's saberplay. However, Lien Rufeng soon found that Lin Sun's face was getting paler and paler, soaked in cold sweat. Obviously, he couldn't hold on any longer. After I kill this little thing, I might be able to snatch the cultivation technique he has learned? Lien Rufeng was even more determined to kill Lin Sun. Lin Sun's background was mysterious. He was only a teenager, but he already had such terrible fighting power. If he was allowed to live, how powerful would he be in the future? Whoosh! Suddenly, a white bone spear pierced through the void and arrived at Lin Sun. The body of the spear was shining with bright starlight. What? Lien Rufeng's pupils shrank. What was this? Puff! There was no time for him to dodge. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, and the next moment, everything went black and he lost consciousness. Seeing this, Lin Sun was stunned. Then he exhaled a long breath of foul air, feeling an indescribable tiredness spread all over his body like a tide. He bit the tip of his tongue to cheer himself up. It was not the right time to rest. Kill them all. A tranquil and sweet-sounding voice sounded in his ears, like a gentle breeze blowing over. Kill them all. The image of Wu Henshui flashed in Lin Sun's mind. Yes. Xia Ji raised her fair and beautiful face. Looking at Lin Sun's pale face, she couldn't help frowning and said seriously, "You should have a rest." Saying this, she grabbed Lin Sun's clothes at the waist, lifted him up, and then rushed away. Taken away by this little girl again, Lin Sun smiled bitterly, feeling ashamed. Then he could no longer bear the exhaustion, and fell into a deep sleep. So far, Wu Henshui, Lien Rufeng and the other 16 people were all killed. Corpses were scattered in different corners of Feiyun Village. It was a ghastly scene under the bloody sunset. Lin Sun had a dream. In the dream, he heard a familiar cold voice. Tao Seeker, the next time the heaven accessing place opens is 3 months later. The second test of Green Cloud Path is called Body Refining. There are 108 chances to pass the test. If you fail in the end, the heaven accessing place will be sealed again, and it won't open again until 1,000 years later. 3 months? There doesn't seem to be much time left since the last time I tried to break through. Suddenly, Lin Sun woke up from the dream and opened his eyes. Seeing the familiar house decoration, he pondered for a long time and finally shook his head. There was still some time before the next test. It was useless to think too much. He got out of bed, feeling his tiredness had been swept away, but he was still weak. Xia Ji pushed the door open and entered. She didn't seem surprised to see Lin Sun up. She just said, "I'm hungry." Lin Sun was stunned. He thought Xia Ji would ask about his well-being, but she urged him to cook as soon as he woke up. He shrugged helplessly. "I'm going to cook." Speaking of this, he suddenly asked, "How many days have I slept?" Xia Ji answered, 4 days. Lin Sun opened his eyes wide. "You haven't eaten anything these days?" Xia Ji nodded. Lin Sun immediately turned around and rushed into the room. He felt quite distressed to let his savior starve for 4 days. While Lin Sun was busy in the kitchen, Shurao Tianren came in a hurry. When he saw Lin Sun, he was pleasantly surprised. "Lin Sun, you finally woke up." "Uncle Shurao, what's the matter?" Lin Sun said casually while he was busy cooking. Seeing Lin Sun's absent-minded look, Shurao Tianren was speechless. Such a big thing happened 4 days ago. How could it not be a matter? You have been in a coma for 4 days. How could it not be a matter? Chapter 41. In the courtyard, the leaves of a weeping willow in the center of the courtyard had turned golden. It was a refreshing autumn day. Lin Sun and Xia Ji were sitting in the courtyard with a stone table between them. 5 big pots of beast stew were piled on the stone table, giving off a fragrant aroma. These beasts didn't look good, but they were all cooked with various spiritual materials and meat of different fierce beasts, so the taste was naturally delicious. On the other side of the stone table was an iron pot filled with spiritual rice. Lin Sun and Xia Ji ate like crazy. They hadn't eaten for 4 days, so they were starving. Sitting on the other side, Xia Tianren looked at them with a smile and quickly told them what happened 4 days ago. It turned out that after the battle, Shurao Tianren returned to the village with a group of villagers. Seeing the corpses strewn all over the village, they couldn't help feeling shocked, but more excited and happy. The death of Lien Ruffring and his companions eliminated a hidden danger in the village, but there were also many problems waiting to be solved. For example, Xia Tianren found that 5 or 6 strangers, including Wu Henshui, died with Lien Ruffing and his companions. Judging from their clothes, they were obviously not ordinary people. Now that they were all dead in Feiyun village, it was hard to say whether there would be any future troubles. Another example was that the death of Lien Ruffing and his companions meant that there were no guards in Feiyun village, which meant that there would be no helpers to escort goods to Green Sun tribe for exchange. This matter also needed to be solved. After eating 4 bowls of spiritual rice and a pot of beast stew, Lin Sun felt comfortable all over. Making himself a cup of spiritual medicine tea, Lin Sun sorted out his thoughts and asked, "Uncle Xia, do you know the identity of those people who came with Lien Ruffing?" Xia Tianren immediately stood up and said, "Come with me and have a look." Lin Sun glanced at Xia Ji, who was still engrossed in eating, nodded and left home with Xia Tianren. In the center of the village, on the spacious martial arts field, there were dozens of weapons, soft armors, boots, belts, jade pendants, and other miscellaneous items piled up on the floor. In addition, there were 6 corpses. When Lin Sun and Shurao Tianren arrived, they saw Zhou Zhong and other hunters guarding these things. These were found on Lien Rufeng's body. Besides, these 6 bodies are not from our village. I didn't let others touch them. I'm waiting for you to check them and see if you can find some clues. Shirao Tianren explained. Lin Sun praised Shirao Tianren in his heart for being so meticulous. Without hesitation, he went directly to the corpse of Wu Henshui and squatted down to examine it. As early as 4 days ago, when he saw the old man with a goatee for the first time, Lin Sun had sensed an extremely dangerous aura from him. However, the old man had died a violent death. There was a ghastly bloody hole in his chest. It was obvious that he had been killed by a sharp weapon. This reminded Lin Sun of Xia Ji. He was secretly surprised that the little girl's fighting capacity seemed to be more vigorous than he had imagined. At this time, Shirao Tianren, Zhou Zhong and others all gathered around, looking at Lin Sun with curiosity and unspeakable awe. 4 days ago, when they saw the corpses of Lien Ruffling and others, they were all shocked for a long time and finally realized the horror of this 13-year-old boy. It was unimaginable for the villagers that Lin Sun had killed more than 10 practitioners, including Lien Ruffling, who was at the 4th level of martial realm. Therefore, in their hearts, Lin Sun's image had unconsciously changed. Under the handsome and warm appearance, there was a kind of horror that made them awe. Lin Sun was unaware of these. He searched the body of Wu Henshui for a while, but there was nothing but a black ring. Could it be? Lin Sun looked at the ring carefully. It was dark all over, like iron or jade. It was heavy in his hand and gave off a cool air. Lin Sun thought of something. A wisp of spiritual energy gushed out from his fingertips and poured into the ring. In the blink of an eye, a small and narrow space appeared in his mind. It was like a small house, and there were many items piled up inside. There were piles of copper coins, tokens, some spiritual materials, medicinal herbs, and some bottles and jars. Besides that, there was nothing else. It was indeed a spiritual storage device. Lin Sun was delighted. As far as he knew, spiritual storage devices were very precious. They were mainly made of a rare spiritual material called space crystal. As the saying went, store a mountain in a mustard seed. This kind of spiritual storage device had the same effect. It was impossible to have such a treasure unless it was from a wealthy family. Lin Sun murmured, "It seems that this guy has a very complicated background." With a thought, he took out the token from his storage ring. The token was about the size of a palm, and it was forged from a spirit material that looked like warm jade called wood-grain stone. There was an image of a medicinal herb on the front, which seemed to be a unique symbol. On the back of the token, a line of words was engraved in the seal script of the Empire: Deacon of Green Sun Tribe, branch of Wu's medicine shop. In an instant, Lin Sun knew that this guy was indeed from Green Sun Tribe. Judging from his identity, he should be a deacon of the branch of Wu's medicine shop. Soon, Lin Sun made another discovery. In the storage ring, there was an incomplete book page, on which was recorded the content about blood marrow grit. At the same time, there was an animal skin bag containing various spiritual medicine seeds, weighing more than 10 kilograms. According to the cultivation method of spiritual medicine seeds, these seeds alone could be used to plant at least hundreds of acres of spiritual land. So this is what he wants. Lin Sun was lost in thought. Shirao Tianren couldn't help asking, "What did you find?" Lin Sun answered casually, "If I'm right, Lien Ruffling and his gang must have colluded with this deacon of Wu's medicine shop to occupy the spiritual land of Feiyun village to cultivate spiritual medicine. Occupy the spiritual land." Shirao Tianren, Zhou Zhong and the others were all furious. The whole village depended on the spiritual land to make a living. Who would have thought that Lien Ruffling was so ambitious as to collude with outsiders to occupy the spiritual land? Obviously, he didn't want to let the villagers live. At the same time, they secretly rejoiced that Lin Sun had eliminated Lien Ruffling and his gang, which made their plot fail. Otherwise, if it really happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lin Sun didn't tell Shirao Tianren about the blood marrow grit. Instead, He took out the sky breacher that he always carried with him and cut open the belly of Wu Henshui with the cyan blade. Blood flowed out. What was he going to do? Shirao Tianren and the others were all shocked. Looking at the colorful viscera and blood, they almost vomited. Lin Sun didn't seem to feel uncomfortable at all. His eyes were focused, and his hands were soon covered with blood after checking the meridians and viscera of the dead body. The scene was so horrifying that Shirao Tianren and the others couldn't stand it anymore. They all turned their heads away and didn't dare to look again. Fortunately, only a moment later, Lin Sun got up and came to the pool on one side of the martial arts field. He washed his hands and said, "This guy is really powerful. He has reached the 8th level of martial realm, Great Zhou realm." He looked relaxed, but he couldn't calm down inside. The reason why he cut open the dead body just now was to verify the old guy's cultivation. After all, the old guy hadn't reached the gang spirit realm, and there was no trace of gang qi around him. It was impossible to judge his cultivation when he was alive just from his appearance. After verification, Lin Sun finally realized that the old guy not only had an unknown background, but also had an extremely high cultivation. If Xia Ji hadn't helped him this time, he might have been killed by this guy. What about Xia Ji? The little girl killed an overmatch on the 8th level of martial realm with one strike. Wouldn't her cultivation be even more powerful? Shirao Tianren looked solemn and worried. Such a big shot died in our village. Will there be some troubles in the future? Lin Sun shook his head and said, "I'm not sure yet. I'll go to the Green Sun tribe to inquire about it later. Maybe then I can make a judgment." Shirao Tianren was surprised. "You're going to the Green Sun tribe?" Lin Sun shrugged and smiled. "Of course. Without Lien Rufeng and the others, I have to help you exchange some living materials in the Green Sun tribe." Shirao Tianren understood, and couldn't help feeling touched. Lin Sun waved his hand and interrupted. "Uncle Shirao, you don't have to say thank you. Since I'm a member of Feiyun village, it's what I should do." Shirao Tianren took a deep breath and suppressed his emotions. "Okay. Lin Sun, if you need anything in the future, just tell me. Although Feiyun village is poor, as long as you need help, we will do it for you even at the cost of our lives." Zhou Zhong and others beside him also nodded. Lin Sun smiled and turned around to check the trophies in other places of the martial arts field. The trophies, this time, were not worth mentioning. Most of the things carried by Lien Rufeng and others were not of high value. The only thing that caught Lin Sun's attention was a pair of boots engraved with Gale Wind Spiritual Tattoo. The boots were stripped from Lien Rufeng and could be regarded as a spiritual weapon. But judging from the appearance of the Gale Wind Spiritual Tattoo, they were only crude and common, so the value was not high. Lin Sun took the storage ring and boots and left the rest of the trophies to the village head Shirao Tianren. In the end, the corpses of Wu Henshui and the others were also moved out of the village by Zhou Zhong and the others. They were burned clean, and even the ashes were not left. Before leaving, Lin Sun suddenly thought of something and said to Shirao Tianren, "By the way, Uncle Shirao, the danger has been resolved. How about we go to dig the Feiyun fire copper in a few days?" Hearing this, Shirao Tianren was also excited. He nodded and said, "It's up to you. We don't need to worry about anything when we get the wealth in our hand." Chapter 42. When Lin Sun got home, he heard a series of knocking sounds. In the yard, Xia Ji was hammering a pair of inner armor with a giant hammer. Every time the hammer was hammered, sparks would burst out. Xia Ji was only 5 or 6 years old, but she was carrying a rough giant hammer in her white hand, which looked very incongruous. But in her hand, the giant hammer was as easy as an embroidery needle. With a unique rhythm, she kept hammering with ease. Lin Sun recognized the inner armor. It was made by himself with the scales of a one-horned lizard. 4 days ago, when he was fighting with Lien Rufeng, this inner armor helped him fend off a blow from the back. But it was also because of this blow that the inner armor was damaged. But Lin Sun didn't expect that Xia Ji would take the initiative to repair his inner armor. It was so unexpected. Lin Sun stepped forward and looked down at the giant hammer in Xia Ji's hand. He was shocked again. The hammer head was like a lump of iron, and there were many fingerprints on its surface. "Did you make this with your hands?" Lin Sun asked. Xia Ji nodded, and without stopping, she said casually, "I didn't have a suitable hammerhead, so I made one with iron." Lin Sun gasped. This was refined iron. This little girl actually used the strength of her fingers to pinch out a giant hammer? He stared at Xia Ji in a daze, wondering if there was an ancient fierce beast hidden in her delicate and beautiful body. Xia Ji dropped the giant hammer, picked up the inner armor and handed it to Lin Sun. "It's repaired. Have a try." Looking at the new inner armor, Lin Sun smiled and praised, "I didn't expect you to have such good craftsmanship." Xia Ji ignored him and walked into the room. "I'm going to sleep for a while. Remember to cook for me, Lin Sun. I'll be hungry when I wake up." Bang! With that, the door was closed. Lin Sun shrugged. He had long been accustomed to Xia Ji's maverick behavior, which was totally different from other children. His gaze landed on the giant hammer, and he reached out to pick it up. However, the giant hammer was incomparably heavy and did not budge at all. Lin Sun was shocked. He exerted all his strength and ran all the spiritual energy in his body to lift the hammer. With a slight sense, he immediately knew that the hammer was at least 250 kilograms in weight. Boom! Lin Sun loosened his grip and the giant hammer fell to the ground, smashing a pit directly. What a little monster! When Lin Sun thought that the hammer was made by Xia Ji, his face became very interesting and he became more curious about the origin of Xia Ji. "I'll have to ask her when she wakes up." Soon, Lin Sun stopped thinking about it and went into the kitchen to cook. Then, he sat down on a chair in the courtyard. With a flip of his hand, an imperial copper coin appeared in his palm. He held it in front of his eyes and looked at it. This was the first time that he had seen a real copper coin. It was about the size of a baby's palm, dark yellow, and felt warm and delicate in his hand. As far as Lin Sun knew, the currency of Xiao Empire was made of a special mineral called Cloud Spirit Stone, mixed with more than 10 kinds of materials such as gold, silver, and copper, and refined through many complicated and strict unique technique. It was impossible for the outside world to master this kind of money-making technique. The currency of Xiao Empire was divided into 3 categories: gold coin, silver coin, and copper coin. The exchange rate was 100. Both sides of the copper coin, silver coin, and gold coin were engraved with unique patterns of Xiao Empire. The pattern on the obverse of the copper coin in front of him was composed of 3 parts. A cluster of blazing Xiao flower represented the royal family of Xiao Empire. An extraordinary green deer standing in the air represented the Green Deer School, the first school of the empire. It was a holy sword that pierced through the sky on purpose, representing the military ministry of Xiao Empire. In addition, the edges of the 3 patterns were engraved with dense and gorgeous cloud-patterned branches and leaves, representing the upper-class dignitaries, aristocratic families, and clans that had made great contributions to Xiao Empire. On the reverse side of the copper coin, a landscape was engraved with clouds and mist, magnificent and unpredictable meaning. Even Lin Sun didn't know what the landscape pattern on the reverse side of the copper coin represented, but there was no doubt that it was meaningful. Lin Sun blew on the copper coin in his hand, which made a unique, sweet-sounding sound. This was the Xiao coin. Whether he wanted to survive in Xiao Empire or to cultivate himself, the support of Xiao coin was absolutely inseparable. From the storage ring left by Wu Henshui, Lin Sun unexpectedly gained 1,500 copper coins, which was equivalent to 15 silver coins. The value of the imperial currency was very high. For example, 3 copper coins could buy half a caddy of spiritual grains. The piece of Feiyan fire copper Lin Sun showed to Shirao Tianren was only the size of a thumb, but it could be exchanged for 30 copper coins in the Green Sun tribe, which was equivalent to 5 caddies of spiritual grains. However, Lin Sun didn't know much about the specific exchange value of various items in Xiao Empire, so he couldn't understand the purchasing power of 1,500 copper coins. In addition to the copper coins, Lin Sun also gained a bag of spiritual medicine seeds from the storage ring, most of which were not very valuable but were necessary for cultivation. Lin Sun didn't intend to try planting them either. The cultivation of spiritual herbs was very complicated and required a specialized spiritual botanist to plant them. Moreover, spiritual herbs took a long time to grow, usually taking 3 to 5 years to mature. Some rare spiritual herbs even took hundreds or thousands of years to mature. If Lin Sun guessed right, among Wu Henshui's subordinates, there should be spiritual plants masters who were responsible for planting spiritual medicine. However, all this was meaningless to Lin Sun. He planned to find a chance to sell this bag of spiritual medicine seeds and exchange them for money. To Lin Sun's delight, there were some matured spiritual medicines in the storage ring, all of which were valuable. Some were used to refine one's body, some were used to refine one's cultivation, and there were bottles of medicinal pills for healing. These were all treasures. Wu Henshui was on the 8th level of martial realm, so the items in his collection would naturally not be ordinary. After sorting out the items in the storage ring, Lin Sun found there was still a lot of space inside, so he directly threw the sky breacher into it. With this storage ring, it will be easier for me to sell goods in the Green Sun tribe. At least I won't have to worry about being robbed. Lin Sun carefully put away the ring and didn't wear it on his hand. Wu Henshui was the deacon of Wu Herbal Store in the Green Sun tribe, so many people must have recognized it. In this way, it would be too easy to expose himself if he wore it on his hand. Though this pair of gale-like boots is in poor quality, it is still a spiritual weapon. It's a pity that it's too big. I can sell it later. Lin Sun took out the pair of boots he peeled off from Lien Rufeng. After thinking it over, he finally decided to sell them and threw them into the storage ring. After doing all this, Lin Sun stretched himself and finally felt much more relaxed. In the following time, his top priority was to cultivate. As for the mining of Feiyun fire copper, Shurao Tianren could be in charge of it. Lin Sun calculated that it had been more than 2 months since the last time he passed the test. In less than half a month, it would be time to pass the second test of Green Cloud Path in the Heaven Accessing Place. For this matter, Lin Sun absolutely dared not neglect it. After all, when he passed the first test, he got the meditating magic which was needed to refine the spirit. What kind of benefits would he get after passing the second test? Lin Sun was looking forward to it. In the evening, Shurao Ji woke up and sat at the stone table in the courtyard. Before long, Lin Sun brought up the prepared meal. A few days ago, the village had a good harvest of spiritual grains, which had not been sold yet. So Lin Sun also received bags of spiritual grains from the villagers as gift. Together with the flesh and blood of nearly 30 fierce beasts, he didn't have to worry about food for a period of time. The only thing that worried Lin Sun was that as time went on, Shurao Ji's appetite grew larger and larger. Almost every day, she had to eat 1 more bowl of rice and a large amount of beast meat. Her little belly was like a bottomless pit. According to the speed of her appetite, Lin Sun couldn't guarantee how long the food supply at home could last. Fortunately, there was no need to worry about it now. While eating, Lin Sun asked casually, "Shurao Ji, where are your parents?" Shurao Ji chewed a piece of fragrant beast meat and shook her head. Lin Sun continued, "What about your home? Do you remember?" Shurao Ji thought for a while and shook her head again. "As long as I can remember, I have lived in the mountains with Uncle Xiong." She looked quiet and serious, but her words made Lin Sun feel a little complicated. This little girl actually lived in the mountains since she was a child. Who is Uncle Xiong? You saw him that day. Lin Sun suddenly thought of the mighty grizzly bear. he saw in the deep forest that day. He couldn't help but be surprised. Is it the fierce beast killed by the voodoo barbarian? Shirao Ji frowned, raised her eyes to look at Lin Sun, and said seriously, "You can't say that about it." Lin Sun hurriedly apologized. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful." In fact, he also felt strange. Shirao Ji was brought up by a mighty grizzly bear. No wonder the words she said were so complicated and obscure when he saw her for the first time. Wait, no. What Shirao Ji said before was not the language of beast. It was obviously a completely different language. "I don't know what the voodoo barbarian is, but I will kill him with my own hands one day to avenge Uncle Xiong," Shirao Ji said seriously, with a pair of clear black gem-like crescent eyes full of firmness. Saying this, she buried herself in the food again. Interrupted by her, Lin Sun forgot to ask her how she learned the language she used to speak. He thought of the scene of the duel between Sea Spirit Realm, that day. One was in a green robe and riding on a sword, obviously a strong practitioner from Xiao Empire. The other one was called Voodoo Barbarian, which should not be a strong practitioner from Xiao Empire. Lin Sun still remembered that the Voodoo Barbarian really wanted to kill Shirao Ji that day, not himself. Coupled with the complicated and strange language spoken by Shirao Ji, Lin Sun couldn't help but speculate that Shirao Ji actually came from somewhere outside Xiao Empire. Chapter 43. After dinner, Xia Ji lay on the bed and slept on Lin's pillow, covering Lin's quilt. Of course, it was Lin's bed. Xia Ji's behavior was straightforward. She never said polite words. She was also quiet, which made her special. Only when she slept did she really look like a little girl. Her eyelashes were curved like a pair of fans, her breath was light and long, and her almost perfect white face was full of innocence. Looking at the sleeping Xia Ji, Lin Sun smiled. He could feel that the little girl had a unique kindness, affection, and even dependence on him. Although he still couldn't determine Xia Solstice's origin, Lin Sun no longer cared about it. In his opinion, Xia Solstice's existence made his life no longer lonely, and added a sense of steadiness and stability that he had never had before. Perhaps it was also a kind of emotional dependence? Lin didn't know about it, but he had already noticed that Xia Ji had integrated into his life. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Lin held his breath and began to meditate. The third level of martial realm, body opening, emphasized on guiding the spirit to circulate the 5 viscera and consolidating the source. The next level was acuporoscope. The so-called acuporoscope was to dredge the acupoints all over the body. Acuporoscope led to spiritual concentration, and spiritual concentration led to sufficient qi and blood. After reaching this level, the practitioner's cultivation would undergo another transformation. Not only would his strength be doubled, but his body would also be further tempered and the impurities in his body would be removed. After the fierce battle 4 days ago, Lin had been keenly aware that his cultivation had been further consolidated and tempered. As long as he kept practicing hard, it might not take long for him to break through again. This was the benefit of actual combat. Through the baptism of blood and fire, practitioners would not only improve their fighting means, cultivation methods and experience, but also further consolidate their cultivation. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Lin Sun ran his spiritual energy through his body 36 times, then stopped meditating and began to meditate on star circulation. Needless to say, the meditating divine arts was indeed extremely marvelous and profound. Although it only had 3 realms, star circulation, moon transformation, and sun glory, every realm could be said to be all-inclusive, and the more one comprehended it, the more unfathomable and profound one felt. At this time, Lin Sun's sea of consciousness was covered with a starry sky. The starry sky was deep and vast, dotted with thousands of stars, but each star was out of reach and dim. It was really shameful. Although Lin had been practicing meditating magic day and night, He hadn't been able to step into the realm of star circulation until now. But no matter what, Lin Sun's soul was condensed and strengthened every time he meditated, which brought obvious benefits. Lin Sun's breath became long and deep. In his sea of consciousness, all his perceptions were concentrated, reflecting the billions of stars in the starry sky. When he was able to perceive the star path, and use the star path to guide a ray of star radiance down, he would be considered to have truly stepped into the threshold of the star circulation realm. This step was also called lighting the stars. Lin Sun had no distractions, no desires, and just meditated quietly. In a trance, he seemed to fly up to the sky, flying thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles without tiredness or desire. There was an instinctive force of nature pulling him up. He flew to the sky, flew beyond the ninth heaven, and flew to the vast and boundless starry sky. Countless stars were reflected. At this time, Lin Sun found that those stars were not fixed, but circulated along different trajectories. It was as if an invisible hand was controlling all of this. Every star's orbit was unconstrained and unconstrained, indescribably mysterious. Looking at it, the starry sky was like a chessboard, and those stars were the chess pieces in the chessboard. The circulation trajectory was the place where the chess pieces move. Lin Sun watched and perceived it quietly. As time went by, an indescribable feeling arose in his heart. If the starry sky was the chessboard and the stars were the chess pieces, who could play this game? It was me. Lin Sun suddenly understood, and all his perceptions spread like a tide, like a ray of light rushing up to the starry sky, lighting up one of the stars. At that moment, it seemed that an invisible hand had placed a chess piece on the chessboard. The stars were the chess pieces. When they were lit up, the chess pieces came to life, and the real game and journey began. Clatter at the same time, in Lin Sun's sea of consciousness, in the dim starry sky, a vague star suddenly lit up, sprinkling a clear light across the void and falling into Lin Sun's sea of consciousness. Lin Sun also suddenly became sober at this moment, and his soul felt an indescribable coolness and comfort from inside to outside, as if soaking in a hot spring. All his pores opened, and he was so comfortable that he almost moaned. The star circulation realm. Finally, he stepped into the threshold. Lin Sun was excited. It took him more than 2 months to unintentionally light up the first star in the sea of consciousness, which really surprised Lin Sun. At this moment, his perceptions spread out like a delicate spider web, and in a twinkling of an eye, it covered the courtyard where he lived. All the scenes in the courtyard appeared in his mind, including the grass swaying in the night wind, the crickets resting under the window lattice, a drop of cold dew on the edge of the well, and the weeping willows swaying in the moonlight. Everything was so clear, vivid, and ethereal. This was perception, a power from the soul. All this was also called, the spirit comes out of the body, and all things reflect in the heart. Generally speaking, only after breaking through the martial realm and stepping into the gang spirit realm could practitioners have such a power of perception. But now, Lin Sun, who was only at the 3rd level of the martial realm, had achieved this step. All this was inseparable from the credit of meditating magic. Merely stepping into the threshold of the star circulation realm allowed him to possess such power. One could well imagine how profound this soul-refining technique was. This was indeed the entry stage. As far as Lin Sun knew, when one could use the power of self-perception to light up all the stars in the night sky in the sea of his consciousness and lead the starlight to shine on everything, he could be regarded as the consummation of star circulation. Lin Sun felt it carefully and found that he could perceive everything within a radius of 30 meters at most. Any further would be beyond his power. What? Lin Sun was about to get up and use the inscribing pen to inscribe a spiritual tattoo to test the specific changes brought by the strengthening of his soul. Unexpectedly, when he opened his eyes, he found that Xia Ji had put her head on his lap, sleeping lazily, with a trace of attachment on her beautiful and tranquil face. A rare smile hung on the corner of her mouth. Lin Sun thought for a while, and carefully moved her head away. She frowned and muttered, "No." Then she hugged Lin Sun's leg. Lin Sun smiled bitterly. He had no choice but to wait for the test tomorrow so as not to disturb the little girl's sweet dream. Lin Sun lay down and looked at Xia Ji beside him, thinking quickly about how to prepare for the second challenge of the heaven accessing place that would come soon. After a long time, Lin Sun also fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Lin Sun got up and repeated the marching boxing in the yard. He didn't stop until his whole body was sweating and his blood was boiling. He washed his face and rinsed his mouth with the cold well water, put on a set of clean clothes, and then went into the kitchen to busy himself. Lin Sun clearly felt that he was full of vigor, and his 5 senses and 6 senses were all refreshed. Xia Ji immediately woke up when she smelled the fragrance from the kitchen. It seemed that in her world, sleeping and eating were always the most important things, which could not be neglected. While eating, Lin Sun suddenly thought of something and asked, "Xia Ji, have you practiced the body refining method?" Xia Ji shook her head blankly, "No." Lin Sun pointed at the huge hammer thrown in the corner of the yard and asked, "Then how did you make this huge hammer?" Xia Ji answered casually, "I made it with my hands." Lin Sun was speechless. Xia Ji frowned and looked at Lin Sun for a while. Then she asked, "Are you going to refine your body?" Lin Sun nodded. He thought for a long time last night. The second challenge of the heaven accessing place was called body refining, so it had something to do with body refining. Moreover, the number of challenges this time was 108, which proved that it was extremely difficult and had a high chance of failure. Under such circumstances, Lin Sun naturally had to prepare in advance. It would be better if he could further refine and improve his body. But to Lin Sun's regret, he didn't know how to refine his body except for some nourishing medicine soup with the flesh and blood of fierce beasts and various spiritual materials. There were many special methods for refining the body in the world, but Lin Sun didn't have any, and he couldn't find any in Feiyun village. In fact, according to the realm of cultivation, the 9 levels of martial realm were actually a kind of cultivation for the practitioner's body. The first level, qi guiding, refined the sense of qi inside the body. The second level, internal strength, refined the muscles and tendons of the limbs and bones. The third level, opening, refined the 5 viscera. The fourth level, orifices clearing, refined the acupoints of the whole body. The fifth level, marrow cleansing, refined the fascia and bone marrow. The sixth level, blood burning, refined the blood inside the body. The seventh layer of minor circulation realm was similar to the 8th layer of great circulation realm. It was a comprehensive tempering of one's flesh, tendons, bones, acupoints, and internal organs. Small circulation was the preliminary practice. The great heavenly cycle was a further tempering. The 9th level, spirit transformation, involved tempering one's spiritual energy along with one's body, causing it to undergo a transformation. All the practice in the 9 levels of martial realm was to lay a solid foundation for the practitioner, so that he could smoothly condense Gang Qi from the spiritual energy when he reached the Gang spirit realm. But obviously, Lin Sun was only at the 3rd level of martial realm. If he wanted to further refine his body, it would be difficult to do so in a very short time without other means. Xia Ji thought for a moment and said, "How about we fight?" Lin Sun was stunned. "Fight?" Xia Ji nodded seriously. "Yes, fighting with pure physical strength is also one of the most direct ways to refine the body." Lin Sun was surprised. "How do you know?" Xia Ji was confused. After thinking for a long time, she shook her head. "I don't remember, but I know it's not wrong." Lin Sun gritted his teeth and decided to believe in Xia Ji this time. "Anyway, let's have a try. P.S. Thanks to Xia Ji's Piaohong for the reward. You've become the first Supreme Master since the beginning of the Tianjiao War." Applauding. Chapter 44. After dinner, Lin Sun stood in an open space in the courtyard, took a deep breath, and looked at Xia Ji, let's get started. Fighting with physical strength was one of the most direct and effective ways to refine one's body. Lin Sun wanted to have a try to see if the little girl's words were true. Xia Ji got up unhurriedly and stood 3 meters away from Lin Sun. She rolled up her sleeves unhurriedly, revealing her white arms. Then, she raised her little face and looked at Lin Sun with her clear black gem-like eyes, saying, "You attack." Lin Sun was in a daze. To be honest, it was a little difficult for him to attack a girl who was only 5 or 6 years old and whose height was only up to his chest. Although he also knew that Xia Ji's fighting capacity was incredibly strong, he always felt a little uncomfortable to bully a little girl. However, when he saw Xia Ji's serious expression, Lin Sun finally gritted his teeth and punched her with tiger roaring in the forest. Whoosh! The fist force produced by physical strength shook the air, showing a strong and heavy momentum, like a fierce tiger coming out of the mountain. It could be seen that Lin Sun's practice of marching boxing had indeed reached the level of precision, and he could precisely display the essence of the boxing. But in the face of this punch, Xia Ji didn't move at all. She just raised her arm and clasped Lin Sun's wrist with her white and tender fingers, which were as firm as iron tongs. Lin Sun was shocked. When he was about to struggle, Xia Ji's arm shook slightly. With a bang, Lin Sun's whole body trembled violently like a cloth that was about to be lifted up, and then he fell to the ground heavily. All his bones seemed to be broken, which made him grimace in pain and gasp for breath. Compared with the physical pain, Lin Sun was extremely shocked. This blow was as fast as lightning, and he was suppressed to the ground before he could react. Lin Sun could clearly feel that Xia Ji didn't use her spiritual power. In other words, she just defeated him with just a shake of her wrist. Lin Sun got up and looked at Xia Ji awkwardly. There was no trace of contempt in his eyes, but seriousness and seriousness. At this time, Xia Ji also frowned and said doubtfully, "Your control of physical strength is too poor. Even the fiery bristled boars in the mountains are better than you." Lin Sun's face darkened at once. How could a 5- or 6-year-old girl say that he couldn't even compare to a pig? It was simply a disgrace. Boom! Exhaling like thunder, Lin jumped to his waist, clenched his fingers into a fist, and launched a move of Tsongling suppressing the moon. This move was both offensive and defensive. Lin Sun didn't believe that he could be defeated by this little girl. However, he only felt his vision blur, and then his wrist was grabbed again. With a bang, his entire body was like a meteorite, fiercely smashing into the ground, causing dust to fly into the air, and his face to be bruised and swollen. Too pathetic. No matter how shrewd Lin Sun was, he was just a 13-year-old boy, a promising and hot-blooded teenager. How could he tolerate such a disgrace? Again, Lin Sun didn't care about anything else. He shouted and rushed out again. This time, he learned his lesson. He crossed his arms and stretched his fists like a big bow. It was the iron chain crossing the river in marching boxing. Xia Ji couldn't touch his wrist at all with her height. As expected, this time, Xia Ji frowned and suddenly rushed forward. Her footsteps were like dragons and snakes rising to the land. She suddenly rushed into Lin Sun's line of defense and kicked Lin Sun's knee with her toes like a drill. Lin Sun suddenly felt that his right leg was numb, as if he had lost consciousness. His body suddenly staggered and almost fell to the ground. At the same time, his wrist was grabbed by Xia Ji again and shook slightly. The familiar scene happened again. Lin Sun once again had a deep hug with the earth face to face. The ground shook a little and the dust rose. When Lin Sun got up, his hair was disheveled, his face was swollen, and his clothes were covered with dust. He was extremely embarrassed. He stared at Xia Ji with mixed feelings in his heart, including shock, surprise, doubt, anger, shame, and so on. Xia Ji seemed to be unaware of it. She frowned at Lin Sun, and her quiet and beautiful white face was full of doubt. "Lin Sun, you are indeed much worse than the fiery-maned pig. Are you more stupid than the fiery-maned pig?" Boom. Hearing this, Lin soon felt a rush of blood to his head, and an unspeakable sense of shame and indignation burned all over his body like fire. How could she say that he was inferior to a pig? How could she say that he was stupider than a pig? Lin soon almost fumed with anger. With his eyes wide open, he roared and rushed up again. Bang! Xia Ji curled her lips and raised her hand with flagging interest. She shook it slightly and pressed Lin Sun to the ground again. Again. Like an unkillable cockroach, Lin Sun got up and rushed over again without hesitation. The strong sense of shame stimulated his fighting spirit and made him forget everything and put aside all kinds of distractions and restraints in his heart. At this moment, he was like a teenager who did not want to admit defeat. It was also at this moment that Lin Sun looked like a real 13-year-old teenager, hot-blooded, passionate, angry, unwilling, and happy and angry. Bang! He was beaten down again. Again. Bang! Again. Bang! This afternoon, in the courtyard of Lin Sun's house in the east of the village, such noises kept ringing out one after another. The noises made people panic and frightened a flock of skylarks that originally lived on the weeping willow tree to flee in panic. When Shirao Tianren, the village head, heard the noise and entered Lin Sun's house, he saw Lin Sun being carried by Xia Ji like a broken sack and thrown to the ground. Shirao Tianren was dumbfounded and rubbed his eyes hard, thinking it was an illusion. But soon, he was sure it was not an illusion. The teenager who saved Feiyun village from the abyss of suffering and was worshipped by all the villagers was now beaten beyond recognition by a 5- or 6-year-old girl. Shirao Tianren could not help but be in a trance. It was crazy. How could the world become like this? It was so hard to understand. Shirao Tianren came to discuss the mining of Feiyun fire copper with Lin Sun, but after seeing such a scene, he left resolutely. Shirao Tianren felt that he needed to calm down and sober up. What he saw just now was so thrilling that he was in a trance. It was not until the sun set that the courtyard returned to its former tranquility. Gritting his teeth, Lin Sun staggered with his wounded and almost broken body, took off his tattered and dusty clothes, and jumped into the prepared wooden barrel. In the barrel were all kinds of spiritual materials that had been cooked, which had a significant effect on repairing and strengthening the body. Feeling the warm medicinal soup caressing the scars all over his body, Lin Sun could not help but exhale a long turbid breath with a comfortable face. However, when he saw Xia Ji at the side, his heart instantly twitched fiercely, and a wisp of shame and unwillingness appeared on his face before vanishing in a flash. For the whole afternoon, Lin Sun forgot how many times he had been suppressed. Every time, he felt as if he was being pressed by Mount Tai, and his bones almost fell apart. By now, his body had long been numb, and his strength was about to be exhausted. Every inch of his skin, flesh, tendons and bones showed unbearable pain. If that was all, it would be fine. If it was just pain, he could grit his teeth and endure it. The only thing that Lin Sun could not accept was that he had been defeated many times in the whole afternoon, and they were all defeated by the same move. Lin Sun could not help but wonder if he was really more stupid than the fiery-maned boar. Lin Sun shook his head hard. He would never admit that he was worse than a beast. "I'm going to sleep." Xia Ji got up and walked into the room. "Oh, I'll be hungry when I wake up. Don't forget to cook." Lin Sun was stunned and almost cursed out loud. "I'm already like this, and you still want me to cook? You don't know how to pity me at all." Immediately, Lin Sun smiled bitterly and sighed as if he had accepted his fate. Sitting in the wooden tub, he raised his head and looked at the sky where the night was coming. All the emotions in his eyes gradually disappeared, and his eyes became clear and deep as before. In his mind, he silently meditated on the battle in the afternoon. Every detail was deliberated and gradually immersed in it. Xia Ji's fighting method was very simple. She defeated him with a grab and a shake. Her grab was as unbreakable as an iron hoop, and a shake was as clean and neat as a sieve. But when he thought about it carefully, there was a great deal of knowledge in it. For example, the strength of her grab was as fast as lightning and precise, just like a goshawk catching a rabbit. It would be fine if she didn't move, but once she moved, she would definitely hit the target. This kind of ability was a test of eyesight and speed. It was not very mysterious, and anyone could do it as long as he practiced hard. What really moved Lin Sun was the strength of the shake. It was like a sieve, conveying the power of vibration like a tide, which violently shook and collapsed all the muscles of his body, and his bones almost fell apart. This was too terrible. How on earth did Xia Ji achieve this with just the strength of her body? Lin Sun was lost in thought. As the night fell, the sky was sparsely dotted with stars, vast and deep. The efficacy of the medicine in the wooden tub had been swallowed up. Lin Sun's numbness and tiredness were swept away. Without hesitation, he put on a clean suit and began to prepare dinner. The battle with Xia Ji in the afternoon was actually very meticulous. Lin Sun seemed to be beaten miserably, but all the wounds were skin and bones were not hurt. When Lin Sun thought of it, he guessed that Xia Ji should have been merciful, but he didn't know how much of her strength she had used. When the dinner was ready and placed on the table, Xia Ji immediately appeared. Lin Sun smiled and said casually, while serving rice to the little girl, "I've roughly figured it out." Xia Ji answered. She took a piece of animal bone as thick as an arm and chewed it while saying, "If you still can't figure out such a simple thing, you are really too stupid." Lin Sun was speechless. Taking a deep breath, Lin Sun decided to ignore the inadvertent blow in Xia Ji's words. He spat out 4 words from his lips in a serious and firm tone, "Let's continue tomorrow." Every word was sonorous, but Xia Ji always felt there was a trace of bitterness and unwillingness in his voice. She couldn't help looking up at Lin Sun, tilting her head and saying thoughtfully, "Diligence can make up for one's inadequacy, and clumsy birds fly early. These are the 2 words I have just learned, and I think they are very suitable for you now." Lin Sun's face darkened at once. Was this little girl addicted to torturing him? What did it mean to make up for one's inadequacy? What did it mean to be a clumsy bird? Was he such an unsightly image in her mind? "Let's eat." Gritting his teeth, Lin Sun glared at Xia Ji and vented all his emotions on dinner, stopping the conversation that made him full of frustration. Chapter 45. The next morning. After breakfast, Lin Sun got into position and looked at Xia Ji, who was standing 3 meters away from him. He was full of fighting spirit. Last night, he hardly rested. After cultivating his spiritual qi and soul, he had been deducing Xia Ji's fighting skills in his mind. This was a kind of fighting with only physical strength. The purpose was to refine his physique. But after yesterday's fiasco, Lin suddenly understood that as long as his physique was strong, he could master the technique of exerting force, which could also be regarded as a real means to kill the enemy. Like Xia Ji, she didn't need to use spiritual energy at all, but her fighting capacity was already terrible. "Let's start." Xia Ji looked tranquil. The soft light of the morning evoked a dazzling and holy aura on her beautiful face. Whoosh! Without hesitation, Lin Sun stepped forward like a galloping horse, with a heavy momentum. If one looked carefully, the muscles on his body bulged up like ripples that rose and fell. All his strength was concentrated, and his entire body was like a fully drawn bow that was accumulating strength while waiting to be shot. Tiger roaring in the forest! This punch was completely different from yesterday's. It was simple, neat, and direct. The strength of the arms sank into the spine along the shoulder blade, driving the muscles of the ribs to exert force together. All the muscles suddenly twisted like taut steel wires. Boom! The air was rubbed by this punch and made a dull explosion. Xia Ji was still unperturbed by this. She turned over her palm and clasped Lin's wrist again. However, before she exerted her strength, she felt that Lin's wrist muscles were shaking at an extremely high frequency, which made him as slippery as a loach. In a flash, he got rid of her iron-like palm and fingers. Lin Sun's eyes brightened. Sure enough, as long as he mastered the technique of exerting force, he could move every joint and bone of the body as easily as he wanted. In the past, he only knew how to use spirit energy as the main method of battle, and it was only after some contemplation last night that he understood that every inch of his skin, tendons, skin, and joints contained formidable strength. As long as he was able to drive them together and circulate them in his heart, he would be able to exert unimaginable strength. It was like comparing the body to a battlefield. Every inch of muscle and joint was like soldiers distributed on the battlefield. As long as they could be commanded in unison, they would be able to unite into the most powerful army. But before Lin was happy, Xia Ji's fingers suddenly flicked on Lin's wrist like a snake. Lin felt his wrist was numb, and then he lost consciousness. Then, with a bang, Xia Ji grabbed him by the arm and shook him again. His body was like a sieve as he fell to the ground. Gritting his teeth, Lin Sun stood up and rushed forward again. The tip of Xia Ji's brush just now happened to pierce his wrist joint, breaking his continuous muscle strength and causing him to lose consciousness. Lin Sun didn't need to think about it to figure it out. Therefore, when he fought again, he began to guard against it carefully. However, after merely 2 moves, he was once again beaten to the ground. This time, he was defeated by Xia Ji's unexpected lock wrist. Her hands were like iron hoops, locking his wrist. Her left hand pushed forward and her right hand pulled back, showing a kind of opposite impact force, directly dislocating his wrist joint. Her action was crisp and neat. With a crack, Lin's wrist hung down softly. Not until he was knocked to the ground did he feel a sharp pain in his wrist. This was called separating tendons and dislocating bones. When Lin Sun put his wrist joint back together, there was no trace of frustration in his eyes when he looked at Xia Ji. Instead, his fighting spirit was blazing like fire. Although he was defeated after only 2 moves, he was much stronger than yesterday, which made Lin Sun very clear that he was making rapid progress. "Go on!" Lin Sun shouted in a low voice and exerted force again. However, he had abandoned the inherent framework of marching boxing, no longer rigidly sticking to the move. Instead, he exerted force with his palms and fingers more freely. Bang! 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 In the following period of time, a series of rising and falling sounds once again rang out in the courtyard, causing one's heart to tremble. It was unknown when the gate of the courtyard was opened, and a group of little kids came in. They were all children in the village. When they saw Lin Sun, their adored martial arts master, was defeated by Xia Ji again and again, they couldn't help but open their mouths wide and gasp. Xia Ji was only 5 or 6 years old, the same age as many little kids, or even younger. But now she defeated Lin Sun again and again, which was really incredible. Seeing Lin Sun hit the ground again and again, even they felt frightened. They secretly rejoiced that they hadn't provoked Xia Ji before, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. Before long, a group of uncles and aunts in the village also heard the news and came to watch the fun. They also felt distressed about Lin Sun's experience, but they were more shocked by Xia Ji's fierce fighting power. Not until now did they know that this incredibly beautiful little girl turned out to be even stronger than Lin Sun. Was she really a little girl of 5 or 6 years old? Being surrounded by so many people, Lin Sun felt quite ashamed and annoyed no matter how thick-skinned he was. He gritted his teeth and didn't say a word, venting all his strength in the fight. As for Xia Ji, she still looked quiet and dealt with every move. She beat Lin Sun down again and again without mercy or giving him any face. Perhaps in her eyes, all this was for Lin Sun to refine his body, which was a serious matter. As for face and self-esteem, Xia Ji didn't have such concept. After watching for a long time, seeing Lin Sun fall down again and again, even Shurao Tianren couldn't bear to see it. He stared at the villagers around and waved his hand, saying, "You have nothing to do? Then come with me to the smoking mountain to mine." He immediately dispersed the crowd and closed the gate, leaving the courtyard for Lin Sun and Xie Ji to concentrate on the fight. Until the night fell, Lin Sun jumped into the wooden barrel again with all his wounds, silently deducing the details of the fight during the day. Xie Ji went straight to bed. Days like this lasted for 5 days. During these 5 days, Lin Sun fought with Xie Ji in addition to eating, recovering his wounds with the help of medicine soup, and silently deducing the details of the fight. It seemed boring, but it was a very fulfilling process. During these 5 days, Lin Sun had mastered the skills of exerting force in his body. He could easily mobilize the strength of every muscle, joint, and bone in his body. Moreover, his physique had also changed significantly. Judging from the appearance, Lin Sun's body was still thin and slender, but under the thin appearance, every inch of muscle and skin seemed to have been hammered thousands of times. It was as hard as rock and as tough as steel wire. Every inch of tendons and bones seemed to have been polished over and over again like jade, as if they were made of fine steel. Even his qi and blood were stronger than before. Undoubtedly, the continuous failures in these 5 days seemed to be frustrating, but the benefits were also obvious. Lin Sun's physique was further refined and improved. This was undoubtedly an exciting thing for Lin Sun. However, during these 5 days, the fierce beast's flesh and blood, spiritual grains, and various spiritual materials stored in his house were consumed at an alarming rate. Not only did they consume a lot of materials to heal their wounds every day, even Lin Sun and Xie Ji's appetite had increased. Now, Lin Sun could eat half an adult snowspot leopard and 10 kilograms of spiritual grains a day. As for Xie Ji's appetite, it could only be higher than Lin Sun's. At this rate, all the fierce beast's flesh and blood in his house would be eaten up in less than half a month. As for the spiritual grains, they might not even last for a month. Lin Sun had to start thinking about how to replenish the materials. Fortunately, under the leadership of Shurao Tianren, villagers in Feiyun village had begun to dig the Feiyun fire copper. Now they had harvested more than 50 kilograms of ore. If the impurities in the ore were removed, there would be about 25 kilograms of Feiyun fire copper left. If they were sold, they would be able to get a fortune. Lin Sun planned to go to Green Sun tribe after a while. In addition to selling the Feiyun fire copper, he still had many valuable items that he could exchange for a lot of materials. On the 5th morning, when Lin Sun got up, he was surprised to find that Xie Ji was nowhere to be found. Only a note was left in the room. A line of crooked words was written on it, "I'll be back soon." Relieved, Lin Sun looked at Xie Ji's handwriting and wanted to laugh. It was so ugly that he almost couldn't recognize it. Lin Sun had taught Xie Ji these days. Although Xie Ji could communicate with him fluently, she was still illiterate. For the sake of her future, Lin Sun began to teach her how to read and write. Since Xie Ji said she would be back soon, Lin Sun didn't need to worry anymore. He went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. When Lin Sun put the hot breakfast on the table, the gate of the courtyard opened. With a bang, a fierce beast like a calf with a flaming mane was thrown into the courtyard, causing the ground to tremble. It was a fiery-maned boar. At this moment it was tied up by thick and tough vines, and its mouth was stuffed with mud. It could only lie on the ground and groan, and its scarlet eyes were filled with anger and hostility. At the same time, Xie Ji's young and delicate figure came in. She washed her hands, sat at the table and began to eat. Lin Sun looked at all this in a daze. He pointed at the fiery-maned boar and asked, "You went out to catch this beast?" Xie Ji nodded and said seriously, "After you eat, go and fight with that boar. Only a bloody battle can let you know how strong your body is." Lin Sun's expression was a little complicated. "If I fail, does it mean that I'm not even as strong as a pig?" Xie Ji thought for a while and agreed, "That's right." Lin Sun felt depressed. She was just joking before, but now she really wanted to catch a fiery-maned boar. It was obvious that she wanted to embarrass him. "Don't worry, I won't be defeated by a pig." Chapter 46. The fiery-maned boar was an extremely fierce beast. Its body was covered with flaming fur, which looked soft but was actually extremely tough and hard to be injured by swords. It had a violent temperament and unparalleled strength. The pair of tusks in its big mouth was enough to scare a practitioner at the 4th level of martial realm. Compared with the hot-tempered fiery-maned boar, the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard could be regarded as tame. Boom! In the courtyard, when Xia Ji untied the vines on the fiery-maned boar, the fierce beast suddenly roared and stamped on the ground with its 4 hooves. Smoke and dust splashed everywhere. Its bull-like body was like a moving hill, fiercely rushing towards Lin Sun. Its sharp tusks were like a pair of sharp blades, shining with a bloodthirsty luster. Bang! Seeing this, Lin Sun flashed and punched the side of the fierce beast's neck. The fiery-maned boar just shook its head as if nothing had happened. It suddenly turned around and stabbed its tusks at Lin Sun's abdomen like a sharp blade. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes and dodged with a wrong step. He was a little surprised. Although the blow just now was just pure physical strength, it was enough to make a practitioner at the 4th level of martial realm unable to bear it if he was hit. But this fiery-maned boar didn't have any effect at all. Boom! The fiery-maned boar was extremely arrogant. It stared at Lin Sun with its scarlet eyes, and its huge body dashed forward. Lin Sun failed to dodge and had to fight with it. Suddenly, he felt like being hit by a huge rock. His chi and blood rolled over, and his body fell back uncontrollably. What a powerful force! Lin Sun's face darkened. His muscles tightened like steel wires, and his figure moved like a cheetah. He suddenly rushed forward and clamped one of the tusks of the fiery-maned boar with his palms and fingers. Then, he exerted strength in his wrists, and his arm muscles bulged inch by inch. The fiery-maned boar, which weighed more than 500 kilograms, was forcibly lifted up. Then, the muscles of Lin Sun's arms undulated like a tide. All the accumulated strength gathered in his wrists and suddenly burst out, shaking them hard. Boom! The huge body of the wild bristle boar trembled like sifting chaff, and all its bones and tendons made cracking sounds. Lin Sun smashed it hard on the ground, creating a big pit. Lin Sun learned this strike from Xia Ji. With a shake, the power spread like a tide, which was enough to disperse all the power of the opponent. If it was serious, it could even shatter the internal organs of the opponent. But before Lin Sun had time to rejoice, the fiery-maned boar shook its body and got up again. Its scarlet eyes were incomparably violent and ferocious. Howling, it rushed to Lin Sun again. Lin's eyes widened at once. How could this beast be so powerful? As he dodged, he observed and found that the wild bristled boar did not seem to be injured at all. Instead, it became even more ferocious. Its 4 hooves moved as if they were flying as it charged about in the narrow courtyard, bringing with it a wave of smoke and dust. Cracks even appeared on the ground from its step. If it weren't for Xia Ji, the collision would have destroyed all the 3 huts of Lin Sun's house. Bastard! Lin Sun was enraged. He would never admit that he couldn't even defeat a boar. If he did, how could he raise his head in front of Xia Ji in the future? Bang! Lin Sun stopped dodging and rushed forward. He stretched out his arms and suddenly collided with the wild bristled boar. He firmly grasped the boar's tusks in his palms and blocked the wild bristled boar. The wild bristled boar was obviously very angry. It exerted force on its 4 hooves and twisted its body violently, trying to break Lin Sun's arms. But at this moment, Lin Sun suddenly exerted force on his arms like a noose. With 2 cracking sounds, the wild bristled boar's tusks were broken and blood gushed out. The wild bristled boar roared madly in pain and almost sent Lin Sun flying. At this moment, Lin Sun lowered his body and locked the wild bristled boar's leg joints like a lock. With a fierce twist, the wild bristled boar's right foreleg joints were removed and its body fell down with a loud bang. This was not the end. Lin Sun seized the opportunity and removed all the joints of the wild bristled boar's limbs in a few breaths. The wild bristled boar completely lost its support and could only roar miserably on the ground. At this point, Lin Sun stood up, clapped his hands and exhaled a long breath of turbid air. Looking at the wild bristled boar that had been completely subdued, he couldn't help feeling a touch of pride in his heart although he was exhausted. A few months ago, he was still a weak guy. Now, he could suppress a fierce beast whose strength was comparable to that of a practitioner at the 4th level of martial realm with only his physical strength. How could Lin Sun not be excited by such a great change? In addition to his diligent practice day and night, he could achieve all this with the help of Xie Ji. It was the constant fighting with Xie Ji that made Lin Sun's body stronger day by day. His skin, tendons and bones were as hard as iron and steel, full of explosive power. At the same time, through these days of continuous fighting, Lin Sun understood the tricks of physical combat and could easily gather the strength of every inch of his body. Even without spiritual energy, it seems that I can compete with a practitioner at the 4th level of martial realm with my current physical strength. Lin Sun thought for a moment and shook his head. Practitioners were different from ferocious beasts. They had equipment, weapons and cultivation methods, but more importantly, they had wisdom and experience in fighting, which was not comparable to a beast at all. Therefore, it would not be so easy to defeat a practitioner at the 4th level of martial realm with physical strength. Xie Ji came over and patted the wild bristled boar's head with her white and tender little hand. The wild bristled boar fainted as if it was struck by lightning. Xie Ji looked at Lin Sun and said, "You're barely stronger than this boar." The trace of pride in Lin Sun's heart disappeared at once. He shrugged helplessly and said with a bitter smile, "Can't you praise me?" Xie Ji frowned and thought seriously, "Is there anything worth praising about you?" Lin Sun was speechless at once. At lunch, Lin Sun thought of a question. Compared with spiritual energy, physical strength is only suitable for close combat. No matter how strong the body is tempered, it seems that the strength obtained by concentrating on cultivating spiritual energy is not as powerful as that obtained by cultivating spiritual energy. Hearing this, Xie Ji didn't say a word. She put her fingers together like a knife and gently cut. Chi. A sharp airflow swept out and cut off a weeping willow branch more than 30 meters away. Lin Sun was stunned at once, and Xie Ji buried her head in the food again. After a long while, Lin Sun said with a complex expression, "How on earth do you cultivate?" Just now, he clearly saw that Xie Ji's attack did not have a trace of spiritual power at all. It was completely condensed from the strength of her body. In other words, this fact undoubtedly proved that when physical strength reached a terrible height, it could completely break the shackles of close combat. As far as Lin Sun knew, even if one cultivated spiritual energy, only after stepping into the gang spirit realm could he achieve the stage of releasing spiritual energy and killing enemies at a distance. Compared with this, Xie Ji could exert force at a distance only with her physical strength, which was more and more remarkable. Xie Ji doubted, "It's easy to do this. I've known it since I could remember." Lin Sun didn't feel discouraged this time. Instead, he really believed it. Through these days of observation, he found that there were too many incredible things about Xie Ji. She was no different from the legendary genius who was born with knowledge. Otherwise, who could see such a terrifying fighting power of a 5- or 6-year-old girl? Lin Sun thought for a long time and finally gave up the intention of getting to the bottom of it. Instead, he asked the name of this fighting skill of Xie Ji. In his opinion, this kind of physical combat skill was just like a martial art, which should not appear out of thin air. Xie Ji shook her head. "No name." Lin Sun smiled bitterly. "Then let's give it a name." Xie Ji answered absent-mindedly. Lin Sun seemed to be in high spirits. After thinking for a while, he said, "Let's just call it separating tendons and dislocating bones." These days, he had mastered many skills of physical combat, such as the vibration skill produced by a shake, the strangulation skill with 2 arms, the clavicle skill, and so on. These skills were all simple, direct, and neat, specifically aimed at the enemy's vital part. Just like separating tendons and dislocating bones, it was really ruthless and decisive. Xia Ji nodded perfunctorily, but it didn't dampen Lin's enthusiasm. With bright eyes, he said with assurance, "This martial art still needs to be perfected. But I believe that with our wisdom, this martial art will definitely become more and more powerful. Maybe in the future, it will be famous all over the world and leave its name in history." Xia Ji didn't seem to hear him at all and continued eating. After talking for a long time, Lin soon felt bored when no one agreed with him. He shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's not urgent. We can talk about it later." At this time, Xia Ji suddenly looked up at Lin Sun and said, "Didn't you say you were going to the Green Sun tribe a few days ago?" Lin Sun nodded and said, "Well, if everything goes well, we can set off in 5 days." The reason why he said so was that according to his calculation, the second test of the heaven accessing place would come in 3 days. Before going to the Green Sun tribe, he naturally had to solve this matter. As he refined his body these days, Lin soon gradually became more confident and looked forward to the second test of the heaven accessing place. Thinking of this, Lin soon suddenly realized something and said, "Why do you ask this?" Xia Ji said, "I'm a little reluctant." "It's okay. I'll be back soon." Lin soon felt warm in his heart. Although this little girl had been beating him up these days, she still had a conscience. But the next moment, Xia Ji shook her head and said, "I'm just thinking, if you suddenly leave, who will cook for me?" Lin Sun's expression suddenly froze. It turned out that she was reluctant to leave. He said fiercely, "Don't worry. Even if I leave, I won't let you starve to death." Xia Ji said with a tranquil look, "That's good." Saying this, she began to eat again. At the same time, a dazzling rainbow suddenly flew over the deep mountain forest dozens of miles away from Feiyun village. Chapter 47. The rainbow swept across the sky like a gorgeous waterfall. When it reached the sky above the deep mountain forest, the rainbow suddenly stopped and turned into a flying carpet with an area of more than 10 meters. The surface of the flying carpet was engraved with dense spiritual tattoo formations, shining brilliantly as if it had intelligence. It was absorbing and releasing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth all the time, which was extraordinary. Obviously, this flying carpet was an extremely precious flying spiritual weapon. At this time, a man and a woman were standing on the flying carpet. "Young master, why do you stop here?" The woman was puzzled. She wore a black dress, had a slender waist, and a graceful figure. She had a bright and beautiful oval face, and her black eyebrows were straight. However, the space between her eyebrows carried an aura that was as sharp as a blade. She was like a wild rose with thorns, delicate and beautiful, but full of thorns. If there were bigwigs in Donglin town here, they would definitely recognize that this woman was Mu Wansu, known as Black Rose. At the same time, she was also the person in charge of Keystone Business, the first chamber of commerce in Donglin town. Keystone Business was one of the few chambers of commerce in Xiao Empire, with influence all over the world and many branches in the vast territory of Xiao Empire. It could be said to be as rich as a country. Fortune Godshire, the behind-the-scenes boss of Keystone Business, was a legendary figure in the empire. It was said that his wealth was so astronomical that even the most powerful members of the imperial family could only envy him. As a Black Rose, Mu Wansu could become the person in charge of the branch of Keystone Business in Donglin town. It could be imagined that she was not a simple person. But such a person was standing there with a little subservience at this moment, with a hint of admiration for the man beside her in her tone. "Don't you see that there should have been a battle here not long ago?" The man looked down with his hands behind his back. He was tall and strong, with shoulders as broad as mountains. His face was firm and broad, and his eyes overflowed inadvertently with a profound and disdainful breath. Just by standing there casually, he gave people a sense of oppression as if they were looking up to a high mountain, which was extremely frightening. Battle. Mu Wansu narrowed her beautiful eyes and looked carefully. As expected, she found that the forest below had obviously suffered terrible destructive power, and shocking traces of battle were exposed everywhere. "Young master, you have a good eye," Mu Wansu praised in surprise. The man who was addressed as the eldest young master didn't care about this kind of flattery at all. He continued, "If I'm not wrong, it's the 9th brother of the Xie clan from the Black Cloth Alley of the imperial capital who made a move. However, his opponent is somewhat thought-provoking. The 9th son of the Xie family?" A flash of inspiration flashed in Mu Wansu's mind, and the image of a handsome figure in a jade-green robe suddenly appeared in her mind. She asked in surprise, "The 9th young master of the Xie family, who has recently risen to fame in the empire and is praised as young Sword King? Except for Shi Yutong, who else can display the sword scripture of Unstoppable? This sword manual has a great history, and it's rumored that it's only a fragment and not complete. But even so, it still possesses a terrifying power that can shake the heavens and the earth and kill ghosts and God." A wisp of a blazing bright light suddenly flashed within the eldest young master's eyes when the topic of martial techniques was mentioned. "It's just a pity that we're a step too late. Otherwise, we would be able to seize this opportunity to witness the might of the sweeping sword." There was a hint of regret in his voice. Mu Wansu was stunned, and her heart was in turmoil. It was really the young Sword King. Shi Yutong Xiao Empire was extremely vast. As the capital of the Forbidden City, there was a very famous alley called Black-Clothed Alley. Right now, almost all of the influential and powerful upper echelons of the empire were entrenched in the Black Cloth Alley. The Xie family was a martial arts family with a 1,000-year history in the empire, which had been entrenched in Black-Clothed Alley. As a descendant of the Xie family, the young Sword King Shi Yutong was very famous. It was rumored that he was a first-class cultivation genius. When he successfully mastered his ancestral sword scripture of Unstoppable last year, he caused a sensation in the whole Forbidden City and became famous. It should be noted that no one had been able to master the sword scripture of Unstoppable since it was inherited from the Xie family for nearly 100 years. Although Mu Wansu was not a resident of the Forbidden City, as a person in charge of Keystone business, she had naturally heard of it. That was why she was so shocked at the moment. So, the 9th young master of the Xie family had come to the 3,000 mountains long before us? After Mu Wansu calmed down, she soon realized the key of the problem. It must be so. The eldest child nodded. Now everyone in the Forbidden City knows that the Flamen of the Observatory has observed a strange phenomenon in the 3,000 mountains. It is said that a peerless treasure is likely to be born. I'm afraid that Shi Yutong is also here for this. Then he frowned. I'm just curious about who Shi Yutong has fought with. Mu Wansu thought for a while and took out a map. After a brief identification, she pointed to the distance and said, "There is a village called Feiyun dozens of miles away from here. Maybe we can go there and have a look." The eldest child was surprised. "There are people living here?" Mu Wansu said with a smile. "Before we set off, I specially inquired about the 3,000 mountains. I know by chance that someone once found a small Feiyun fire copper vein here." As they spoke, they drove the flying carpet under their feet and flew away. On the way, Mu Wansu introduced the origin of Feiyun village to the eldest child, and then he suddenly understood. A moment later, they appeared in the sky above Feiyun village. No wonder these villagers can survive. Turns out that they have reclaimed the spiritual fields. The eldest child looked at the spiritual fields below and said thoughtfully. Immediately, he stopped and pointed to the east of the village, saying, "There are spiritual fluctuations there. There should be cultivators living there. Let's go and have a look." At dusk, Lin Sun had already prepared dinner. There were 6 big pots of fragrant animal meat and a pot of white spiritual rice. Lin Sun and Xia Ji sat at the desk under the weeping willow in the courtyard and concentrated on eating. There were only 3 days left before the challenge of heaven accessing place. Lin Sun didn't intend to refine his body anymore. He wanted to take advantage of these 3 days to recuperate and build up his energy for the challenge. I've already roughly summarized the tendon dislocation bone locking technique. It's divided into 5 major tricks, namely shock, twist, lock, drill, and collapse. Of course, this is only a preliminary arrangement. In the future, when I study more combat skills, I'll further improve this combat technique. While eating, Lin Sun introduced quickly. Whether Xia Ji heard him or not, she concentrated on eating, as if Lin Sun's words were not as attractive as the food in the bowl. Lin Sun didn't seem to be angry and just talked to himself. Learning and summarizing were a habit Lin Sun had developed when he was with Master Lu since childhood. Because Master Lu never explained anything, Lin Sun often had to comprehend, learn, and summarize any problems and gains by himself. Although the practice of martial arts was different from that of spiritual tattoos, the principles were the same. While talking, Xia Ji suddenly put down her chopsticks and raised her little face to look at the sky in the distance. A trace of solemnity flashed through her dark, jewel-like crescent eyes. Someone is coming. Lin Sun was shocked. Usually, if it was a resident of the village, Xia Ji wouldn't have such a reaction. This could only mean one thing: someone had come to Feiyun village. Let's continue eating. After thinking for a while, Lin Sun decided to deal with changes by remaining unchanged. Oh, Xia Ji lowered her head and continued eating. It smells so good. Just a moment later, a tall figure came uninvited and pushed the door open, followed by a woman in a black dress. They were the eldest child and Mu Wansu. The eldest child's eyes swept over the animal meat and animal skin hanging on the walls, and then fell on the boy and the little girl in front of the stone table in the center of the courtyard. May I ask who you are? Lin Sun stood up and asked, cupping one hand in the other before his chest. He was secretly surprised by the unfathomable breadth of the boy and the girl. Obviously, they were extremely powerful. Just by facing them, Lin Sun felt a kind of pressure blowing on his face. Oh, we're just passing by, the eldest child said and came to the stone table. He looked down at the 6 pots of animal meat on the table and said, green vine python, green feather mountain marten, striped tiger. These dishes are really rich. I haven't tasted them for a long time. No wonder they smell so good. Lin Sun squinted and suddenly smiled. In that case, if you don't mind, you can sit down and have a taste. Then I won't stand on ceremony. The eldest child smiled and sat down. He took a pair of chopsticks and began to eat heartily. Indeed, he didn't stand on ceremony at all. Looking at him, it was as if he were in his own home. Even Mu Wansu, who followed beside him, was slightly stunned. It seemed that she didn't expect that the eldest child would be interested in these dishes. With such a high status, he had eaten all kinds of delicacies in the world. Mu Wansu didn't understand. She glanced at Lin Sun and felt relieved when she found that he was just a teenager on the 3rd level of martial realm. Although Lin Sun was also curious about the purpose of the boy and the girl, he was a little relieved when he saw that they didn't show any bad intention after coming in. However, he wouldn't relax his vigilance before he figured out their purpose. I'm going to bed. Suddenly, Xia Ji stood up and turned around to leave. Since some time, she had covered her face with a hat, so Mu Wansu didn't pay much attention to her and only regarded her as Lin Sun's younger sister. Only the eldest child inadvertently glanced at Xia Ji's back. He seemed to notice something and frowned imperceptibly. But finally, he shook his head and continued to chew the animal meat piece by piece. Lin Sun saw all these small details. Seeing that Xia Ji didn't make any special reaction, he was relieved. Little brother, would you like a cup of wine? The eldest child invited Lin Sun with a smile. Nobody knew when he took out a pot of wine, and the intoxicating fragrance of the wine filled the air. Then I won't stand on ceremony. Lin Sun walked forward and sat down with a smile, looking happy and at ease. Seeing this, Mu Wansu couldn't help but take another look at Lin Sun. A touch of surprise flashed in her beautiful eyes. Few people could remain so calm in front of the eldest child. Chapter 48. Although she was a little surprised by Lin's calmness, Mu Wansu's face changed slightly when she saw the flagon the child took out. "Child," Mu Wansu couldn't help but speak with a touch of anxiety on her face. "Don't worry." The child waved his hand to stop Mu Wansu from talking. Then he picked up the flagon and poured a cup for Lin. The wine was dark green in color, crystalline and translucent like amber, and it emitted a light, elegant, and continuous fragrance that gladdened the heart and refreshed the mind. Looking at the cup, Lin's eyes brightened. Good wine. He'd noticed Mu Wansu's expression earlier, and he'd roughly guessed that this wine was either a highly poisonous thing or an extremely expensive and rare wine. In Lin's view, the latter was more likely. After all, if the man and the woman really wanted to kill him, they didn't have to do this with their terrible breath. As he said, Lin raised the cup and drank it up, and then his eyes brightened again. After the wine entered his mouth, it was like the spring rain, permeating with warm spiritual energy and spreading to his limbs and bones. In just one breath, Lin felt that the spiritual energy in his body was gradually boiling, saturated and flowing as if it was cheering. Lin couldn't help but praise again, "It's really a good wine." Seeing Lin Sun drink so straightforwardly, the child couldn't help but look at him in surprise, and then he said with a smile, "This wine is called 4 Seasons, brewed by Master May of the Heaven Workshop of Green Deer School. The first cup is like the spring breeze sneaking into the night, moistening everything silently." As he said, he poured another cup for Lin. "Have a taste of the second cup." Lin Sun didn't stand on ceremony and drank up the cup. He only felt a roar, as if a scorching torrent broke through the dam and poured into his mouth. The burning and violent airflow made Lin Sun shiver all over, and his skin turned red inch by inch. His face instantly flushed. It felt like being in a hot summer. The hot air like a furnace was steaming inside and outside his body, and every acupoint and pore was gushing abundant spiritual energy. Lin Sun opened his mouth wide and stuck out his tongue, saying, "The same pot of wine has 2 different unique flavors. Master May of Green Deer School is really a great brewer." Hearing this, Mu Wansu couldn't help but feel speechless. What kind of person was Master May? He was a first-class pharmacist in the Empire. This pot of wine of 4 seasons was a priceless treasure even in the forbidden city of the imperial capital. Only the most powerful and influential people could enjoy it. As the person in charge of Keystone business in Donglin Town, Mu Wansu was also a powerful figure, but she still didn't dare to have a taste of 4 seasons. But now, the eldest young master had used this wine to entertain a youth from a remote village. Besides causing Mu Wansu to be speechless, she couldn't help but feel envious in her heart. This kid was ignorant, but his luck was extremely good. No one knew what was on Mu Wansu's mind. The young master laughed and said to Lin Sun, "The second cup is just like the scorching sun entering the throat and the fire running to the heart. It's all about the word, scorching." Looking at Lin Sun's red cheeks, he said, "Little brother, can you drink the 3rd cup?" Lin Sun did feel a little dizzy, not because he couldn't bear the wine, but because the spiritual energy in his body suddenly soared after only 2 cups of wine, like a mountain torrent suddenly surging in a small pond. He was almost out of control. Obviously, the so-called 4 Seasons wine was a kind of spiritual wine, and it was an extremely precious and rare spiritual wine. Lin Sun forced himself to run his cultivation and drove the surging spiritual energy in his body to circulate constantly with his qi, trying to digest the efficacy of the wine. At the same time, he said with a smile, "Since it's 4 Seasons wine, it would be a pity if I don't taste the 3rd and 4th cup. How shameless this guy is. Mu Wansu thought to herself. She could tell that Lin Sun had obviously experienced the benefits of the wine of 4 seasons. Logically speaking, he should decline it in fear and trepidation. After all, it was so expensive that no one would dare to take the initiative to ask for it. But this brat, he looked like he wanted a yard after being given an inch. Child was also stunned. He looked at Lin Sun for a moment and said, "To tell you the truth, little brother, you really surprised me. Ordinary practitioners in martial realm will fall to the ground drunk after drinking the first cup of wine because they can't bear the spiritual energy in it. But you are obviously different from them." Lin Sun's eyes were blurred. His cheeks were burning, and his words became slurred. "Well, maybe I'm really good at drinking." Child smiled and poured the 3rd cup of wine for Lin Sun. Suddenly, he pointed to the beast's meat and hides hanging around the courtyard and said, "Little brother, did you kill all these fierce beasts?" Lin Sun shook his head. "No, there was a battle in a distant forest a few days ago. Most of these fierce beasts were affected at that time and died on the spot. But I got lucky." Battle. Child and Mu Wansu's eyes were fixed at the same time. Lin Sun seemed to be drunk at the moment and said to himself, "You don't know yet, but both sides in that battle were strong practitioners in sea spirit realm. One of them was walking on a sword like a sword immortal. Sure enough, it was Shai Yutong." Child, and Mu Wansu confirmed another judgment. Who was his opponent? Mu Wansu couldn't help asking. "I think he was called Voodoo Barbarian." Lin Sun frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "I don't remember clearly." As he spoke, he drank the 3rd cup of wine. This time, the taste of the wine was refreshing and sweet, and it gurgled like a stream in an empty valley. It gave off a feeling of spaciousness, as if he was situated in the autumn sky with thin clouds, and it was lonely and bleak. Boom! The spiritual energy in Lin Sun's body was like an erupting volcano, roaring and tumbling, rumbling and scouring the meridians all over his body, becoming more and more violent. Even after being constantly refined by the spiritual vortex of heart vessel and 4 acupoints, it was difficult to restrain the trend of spiritual energy skyrocketing. If it went on like this, it would cause irreparable damage to his body. Lin Sun gritted his teeth and stopped thinking about it. He took a deep breath, sat cross-legged on the ground, and started to break through regardless of anything else. Child and Mu Wansu were not too surprised by his abnormal behavior. On the contrary, Lin Sun's current behavior was normal. It should be noted that wine of 4 seasons was specially brewed for practitioners above Gang spirit realm, which contained enormous spiritual energy. It was incredible that Lin Sun, a teenager at the 3rd level of martial realm, could insist on drinking 3 cups of wine. What really attracted their attention at this time was the voodoo barbarian mentioned by Lin Sun. There are strong practitioners of the Empire of the Dark in the 3,000 mountains. Did they also find out about the abnormal phenomenon of the peerless treasure? Child frowned, his resolute eyebrows full of killing intent. The Empire of the Dark, standing in the depths of the turbulent wasteland, was the mortal enemy of Xiao Empire. Since Shai Yutong said so, it can't be wrong. But I didn't expect that after 1,000 years, the Empire of the Dark began to move again. Mu Wansu pursed her lips, and a touch of worry appeared in her beautiful eyes. "Let's not talk about this. I'm just curious whether Shai Yutong has found the peerless treasure mentioned by the Flamen." Child's eyes were full of cold light. Mu Wansu didn't know how to answer. There were too few clues. Unless she found Shai Yutong himself and asked him, all speculations were unreliable. Child obviously understood this. He immediately shook his head and looked at Lin Sun, who was sitting on the ground to practice. Mu Wansu also looked at him and couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Child, why do you entertain this person with the treasure of wine of 4 seasons? It's too wasteful." Child shook his head, indicating that she didn't need to say more. Seeing this, Mu Wansu was confused, but it was not appropriate to ask again. After a short time, Lin Sun, who was meditating, opened his eyes. He was full of spiritual energy. In a short time, his temperament had changed a lot. Compared with the past, he was more fierce, just like the unsheathing of a sword. In his body, the vigorous and pure spiritual energy flowed through the meridians and acupoints, passed through the heart vessel and the 4 acupoints, circulated along the 5 viscera, and returned to the meridians. Compared with the past, the acupoints in his body faintly glowed, making the blood and qi in his body surge with it. This was the 4th level of martial realm, orifices clearing. As the saying goes, the acupoints are connected to the gods, and the gods are full of qi and blood. Reaching this level meant that the qi and strength of practitioners would undergo another transformation. Congratulations, little brother. You've taken another step forward on the road of cultivation. Child cupped his hands with a smile. Lin Sun hurriedly got up and saluted. Thanks to the wine, child. Otherwise, how could I get such a blessing? Child laughed and waved his hand. Don't mention it. It's just a cup of wine. Please sit down. Lin Sun gladly accepted the order. This promotion was so accidental that he felt a little unprepared. But when he thought about it carefully, he knew that he had unconsciously owed Shai a big favor. But Lin Sun wouldn't say it out. Who knew whether Shy Child did it on purpose or not? If there was a chance in the future, he would pay it back. If there was no chance, he would pretend that it had never happened. Lin Sun was not that kind of old-fashioned and stubborn person, and he would not immediately be grateful to Shy Child just because he owed Shy Child a favor. Looking at Lin Sun sitting down naturally and calmly, Mu Wansu couldn't help but think highly of him. If it were someone else who got such an opportunity, who could maintain such a well-mannered attitude. To tell you the truth, I came to 3,000 mountains this time to look for a peerless treasure. It's said that there was a strange phenomenon here nearly 3 months ago. Little brother, do you know about it? Child said casually and poured the 4th cup of wine for Lin Sun. I don't remember. Lin Sun shook his head. If there was any strange phenomenon in the past few months, I must remember it clearly. But I really can't think of any strange phenomenon. Other people in the village can also prove this. Child said, oh, and fell into meditation. Mu Wansu frowned and asked, Little brother, are you sure? Before Lin Sun answered, Child waved his hand and said, well, don't ask more. I know what I'm doing. Mu Wansu was a little dissatisfied and glared at Lin Sun. It was fine that this boy didn't know how to be grateful after drinking wine of 4 seasons, but he couldn't give any valuable clues, which really annoyed her. But she also knew that a poor boy like Lin Sun probably wouldn't know the secret about the peerless treasure. At this time, the gate of the courtyard was pushed open. Shirao Tianren, the village head, said excitedly, Good news! Today we have gained a lot. His voice stopped abruptly. Chapter 49. Shirao Tianren came at the wrong time. This was Lin's first thought. When he saw the villagers following behind Shirao Tianren, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Each of the villagers was carrying a huge sack on his back, which contained the Feiyun fire copper ores that they had dug out. What made Lin's head hurt was that the 2 little kids also came with a piece of Feiyun fire copper in their hands, which could not be concealed anymore. Lin's mind flashed, but he had taken the initiative to greet them and said with a smile, Uncle Shirao, put these things down. Shirao Tianren nodded blankly and led the villagers to move quickly, directly ignoring the 2 strangers in the courtyard. They also sensed that something was wrong with the situation. Although they were puzzled, no one asked any questions. Even the 2 brats were hugged tightly by the adults to prevent them from talking. At last, Lin Sun winked at Shirao Tianren. The latter understood tacitly and hurried away with the villagers. Feiyun fire copper? Seeing all this, Mu Wansu opened her mouth. Didn't you say that the small vein had been excavated long ago? Sister, you may not know this, but I accidentally broke into that abandoned mine a few days ago and found that there was an undiscovered vein in the deepest part of the mine. Lin soon explained frankly since he couldn't hide it anymore. It's a big fortune. Mu Wansu took a deep look at Lin Sun. Child Shirao was also surprised and said, "Spiritual fields, ferocious beasts, and Feiyan fire copper, your village is really good at making money." Lin Sun shrugged and smiled bitterly. "Child, you may not know this, but Feiyun village is located in the depths of 3,000 mountains, and the nearest Green Sun tribe is more than 2,000 miles away. Although we have some ores, spiritual grains, and prey, it's not easy to exchange them for wealth." Child Shirao smiled and saw through Lin Sun's concern at first glance. But he didn't point it out and said, "This is indeed a big problem." Lin Sun sighed. "Exactly." Child Shirao pondered for a while, took out a token and threw it to Lin Sun. "There is a chamber of commerce in Green Sun tribe called Keystone Business. If you want to exchange materials, you can go there with this token." "Eldest young master, you mustn't." Mu Wansu was shocked and said, "This token is something you always carry with you. It's too precious. How can you give it away so easily?" Lin Sun originally intended to decline, but when he saw this scene, he couldn't help but grasp the token tightly. "It's useless for me to keep this with me. I might as well give it away. Moreover, how can I take back something that I, Shi Xuan, have given away?" The eldest young master spoke indifferently, and his tone was calm yet revealed a strand of arrogance. Mu Wansu was still anxious and said, "But this—" The eldest young master waved his hand and said, "It's settled then. You don't have to say anything else." He turned to Lin Sun and said, "Little brother, it's fate that we can meet here. If you go to the Forbidden City one day, you can come to Keystone Business to find me. Goodbye." With that, he turned around and left. Seeing this, Mu Wansu glanced at the token in Lin Sun's hand unwillingly, and then glared at Lin Sun fiercely, trying to make Lin Sun hand it over voluntarily. But Lin Sun seemed to be unaware of it and simply ignored her. He turned his head and solemnly said to the eldest young master in the distance, "Child, I will repay your kindness today in the future." Seeing this, Mu Wansu knew that the shameless teenager had made up his mind to take the token. She gritted her teeth and whispered, "Boy, I'll settle accounts with you later." Lin Sun suddenly showed an expression of fear and trepidation, but his voice was loud and clear. "Sister, what account do you want to settle? Is it because I didn't take good care of you just now that you are angry with me?" As soon as these words came out, Mu Wansu secretly knew that she was in trouble. Sure enough, the voice of the eldest young master soon sounded in the distance. "Ha ha ha, little brother, don't be angry. Wansu is just joking with you. Wansu, hurry up." Mu Wansu was both angry and annoyed. She didn't expect that the teenager in front of her could be so shameless. Though she thought so, she still put on a sweet smile on her face. With her beautiful eyes sparkling, she said in a sweet voice, "Little brother, I remember that the Green Sun tribe is not far from Donglin town. If there is a chance, we will definitely meet again." As she said this, her black dress swayed and she floated away. "Don't worry, sister. If there is a chance, I will definitely go to Donglin town to see you. If someone bullies me, I will have to ask you to help me," Lin Sun said loudly with a smile. Mu Wansu, who had just walked out of the door, paused. Thinking of Lin Sun's shameless and cunning look, she couldn't help but gnash her teeth with hatred. "Little bastard, since you dare to call me sister, I will let you have a taste of my means when there is a chance in the future." Mu Wansu cursed in her heart and hurried away. If she didn't leave soon, she was really worried that she couldn't help but beat the hateful little bastard. It was not that Mu Wansu was stingy, but she was very clear about the weight of the token worn by the eldest child Shi Xuan. The identity of the token was not only the identity, but also the unimaginable power. But now, this token was casually thrown by Shi Xuan to a village boy. How could Mu Wansu not be anxious? But what was done could not be undone, so Mu Wansu had to accept it. Watching the two leave, Lin Sun stood there quietly for a long time until he saw a streak of rainbow flying away. Then he let out a long breath of turbid air and lay on the chair like a broken skeleton. What he had experienced just now seemed to be calm and peaceful, but Lin Sun felt more tired than a fierce fight. Whether it was the eldest young master Shixian or the woman called Wansu, both of them were extremely powerful. Not only were they powerful in terms of cultivation, but they were also smart and resourceful. Sitting with such people, Lin Sun seemed to be calm, but he was nervous all the time, not daring to be careless. Although it was all over now, Lin Sun still had some doubts in his heart. The eldest child Shishuan should be a strong man with a high status. His purpose of coming here was also easy to speculate. It must be for the so-called peerless treasure. The key point was that if Lin Sun's speculation was right, the time when the heavenly vision, mentioned by Shishuan, happened to be nearly 3 months ago, the day when Lin Sun cracked the secret of the heaven accessing place. Was there any connection between them? Lin Sun didn't dare to talk nonsense, but he would never tell anyone about it. What puzzled Lin Sun was that it seemed that people like Shishuan didn't have to entertain him with such a precious thing as wine of 4 seasons, and even gave him a token before leaving. Why did he do that? Lin Sun didn't believe that there was such a thing as a pie falling from the sky. Even if there was, it would never fall on him. However, Lin Sun couldn't figure out Shishuan's mind, no matter how hard he thought about it. Finally, he had to give up. As long as Shishuan didn't show any malice, it was enough. There was a glass of wine on the stone table. It was winter wine of 4 seasons. Lin Sun took it and drank it up. He felt a bone-chilling coldness piercing his throat like a knife, and then turned into countless tiny cold currents flowing all over his body, making him shiver all over. This wine was really amazing. It came from the same pot, but it was divided into 4 different flavors, and contained extremely terrifying spiritual power. Even with his current cultivation, Lin Sun could only refine 20% of its power, and most of the remaining power was suppressed and stored in his body. It wasn't absolutely a good thing to have a surge of power. Once one advanced too fast, it would easily lead to an unstable cultivation foundation, which would cause great hidden trouble for future cultivation. What Lin Sun pursued was the perfect cultivation state of water overflowing when it's full, so he attached great importance to the tempering of cultivation foundation. He didn't want to blindly pursue rapid advancement, which would make his cultivation path narrower and narrower. That was like seeking fish from a tree, and the loss outweighed the gain. At the same time, a flying carpet spiritual weapon was galloping in the clouds far away from the sky. Child, why did you do that just now? Now that there were no outsiders, Mu Wansu couldn't help asking the question she had been suppressing in her heart. I knew you couldn't help asking. With his hands behind his back, Shishuan's tall and sturdy figure was as unshakable as a mountain. If I said it was just a whim of mine, would you believe me? Mu Wansu was in a daze and shook her head honestly. But I do believe in this kind of fate. Shishuan said indifferently, this lad is about the same age as my 3rd brother, but it's rare that he doesn't have a trace of arrogance that a young man should have. What's more, his courage, wisdom and adaptability are also outstanding. A small place like Feiyun village is doomed to be unable to keep such a person. Mu Wansu sneered. I think he's just a shameless and cunning thief. He's not as good as you said. Shishuan smiled and looked down at the mountains and rivers in the distance calmly. He said, you don't understand. There is a kind of person in the world who will burst into dazzling brilliance as long as he is given a chance. It's too early to talk about this. Whether he's a dragon or a snake, we'll know in the future. Mu Wansu didn't expect that the child would have such a high evaluation of a countryside lad. She couldn't help but look serious. Thinking about it carefully, from the moment he suddenly entered Lin Sun's house to the things that happened in the middle, Lin Sun's bearing and words were indeed not what a country boy should have. However, when Mu Wansu thought of the cunning look Lin Sun showed before leaving, it was hard for her to regard this lad as an outstanding person with great potential. Mu Wansu sighed. I'm just worried that this lad won't understand your intention. There are too many ungrateful people in the world. The corners of Shi Xuan's mouth curled up into a smile. It's just some wine and a useless token. What's the big deal? Even if he doesn't remember me in the future, it doesn't matter. Do you think I'll care about making a lad feel grateful to me? Mu Wansu answered without hesitation, Of course not. What a joke. Who was Shi Xuan? He was the eldest son of Fortune God Shi, the behind-the-scenes boss of Keystone Business. He was a first-class, dazzling figure among the young generation in the Forbidden City. Most importantly, Shi Xuan was a strong practitioner of Sea Spirit Realm who could compete with Shi Yutong, the young Sword King. Perhaps it was just as Shi Xian had said, everything he had done just now was merely a form of fate that he had conveniently done. Chapter 50. Lin Sun held the token in front of his eyes and examined it carefully. The token was made of a special kind of jade, and it was engraved with a dense spiritual tattoo pattern. It was heavy in the hand. On the back of the token, there were 3 gilded ancient characters, Keystone Business. If Lin Sun guessed right, the spiritual tattoo should be a unique symbol of Keystone Business. With this token, I can solve a lot of problems. Lin Sun carefully put the token into the storage ring, and began to think about going to Green Sun Tribe to exchange materials. A few days ago, Wu Henshui, the deacon of Wu Medicine Shop, was killed by Xia Ji. According to Lin Sun's speculation, Wu Henshui would not let it go. Now that he had the token of Keystone Business, maybe he could start from this token to solve the hidden danger of Wu Medicine Shop. Anyway, I have to go to Green Sun Tribe. Lin Sun's eyes were full of thoughts. Green Sun Tribe was the closest place to Donglin Town in the 3,000 Mountains. According to the village head Shirao Tianren, it was comparable to a prosperous town. Whether it was to solve the living problems of the villagers in Feiyun Village or for his future cultivation, Lin Sun had to go there. But before that, Lin Sun had one more thing to solve. The second test of Green Cloud Path in Heaven Accessing Place. At night, Xia Ji woke up from her sleep. She walked out of her room and watched Lin Sun busy in the kitchen. After a long silence, she said, Lin Sun, I want to become stronger. Lin Sun was stunned. He quickly brought out the cooked dishes one by one, and then looked at Xia Ji with a serious face and asked, Why do you think so? Xia Ji pursed her lips and said, No reason. The little girl's expression was as tranquil as before, but an unprecedented firmness appeared in her pitch-black eyes. Lin Sun was silent for a moment. Thinking of what happened during the day, he vaguely understood and said, The man and the woman are not bad people. Xia Ji shook her head and said, I don't know what is good or bad. I only know that if I don't become stronger, I will be very passive when I meet people who are more powerful than me. I don't like this kind of passivity. Lin Sun nodded and said, I see. He did understand that Xia Ji's worldview might be simple, but she was born with a keen insight and knew what she needed. Just like today, when eldest young Master Shi Xuan and the others came, Xia Ji didn't even eat her favorite food and directly turned around and went into her room. At that moment, she must have realized that she was no match for Shi Xuan and could only choose to temporarily retreat. Lin Sun asked while filling her bowl with rice, How do you plan to become stronger? Xia Ji picked up her chopsticks and thought for a long time before she said, Fight. As long as I fight with powerful people, I can quickly become stronger. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes. The answer was beyond his expectation and made him distressed. It was a helpless way to become stronger. If they had the guidance of the elders in the sect, if they had all kinds of powerful inherited cultivation techniques, if they had abundant cultivation resources, who would choose to become stronger by fighting? Unfortunately, both Lin Sun and Xia Ji were now alone, like a pair of orphans who could only rely on themselves. Lin Sun finally made up his mind and said, "Let's talk about it later. I'll give you an answer in a few days." Xia Ji nodded. She had never questioned or resisted Lin Sun's decision, which was a kind of complete trust. And it was this trust that made Lin Sun secretly decide to take Xia Ji away to Donglin town after he solved the problem in Feiyun village. By any means and at any cost, he would find her the best place for cultivation. Lin Sun absolutely didn't want to see Xia Ji fighting with powerful enemies, which was too dangerous. 3 days passed in a flash. At night, Xia Ji had fallen asleep. The starlight floating in from the window sprinkled on her quiet and beautiful white face, giving off an innocent atmosphere. Lin Sun sat cross-legged, his handsome face calm like an ancient well. In the sea of his consciousness, wisps of consciousness rushed to the mysterious bloody gate, the gate to heaven, that had been floating quietly like a tide. Just for a moment, a familiar feeling came over him, as if he was walking in time and space. In a trance, he appeared in that mysterious space again. The straight green cloud path went straight to the distance, and at the end was the mysterious and towering gate to heaven. Standing on the green cloud path, Lin Sun looked around and couldn't help sighing with emotion. This was the heaven accessing place. What kind of person made it? An obscure wave swept over Lin Sun's body in an instant. The next moment, a cold, empty and emotionless voice sounded in this world. "Practitioner, the second test of Green Cloud Path is called Body Refining. You have 108 chances to pass it. Every time you fail, you will have 3 days to rest. If you fail all 108 times, you will fail, and the heaven accessing place will be sealed again." "I see. Let's start." Lin Sun looked calm, with a touch of determination in his clear and deep eyes. "Let's begin." Along with the voice, a light curtain suddenly gushed out from the green cloud path, which was like a vast ocean with raging waves sweeping across the sky. Before Lin Sun could react, a huge whirlpool of water gushed out from the light curtain, like a black hole, and swallowed Lin Sun instantly. The test of body refining is open. The place is the battlefield of spiritual tattoos, Mill Waterfalls. The conditions for passing the test are to break through the waves and reach the peak. In the dark room, Xia Ji, who was sleeping soundly, suddenly opened her eyes. When she saw Lin Sun sitting cross-legged, she couldn't help but close her eyes again. But just for a moment she opened her eyes again, with a touch of confusion on her face. In her perception, Lin Sun seemed to evaporate out of thin air, leaving not even a trace of his breath. But when she opened her eyes, she found Lin Sun in front of her, which made her confused. She opened her dark eyes wide and stared at Lin Sun for a long time. After making sure that he was real, she closed her eyes again and began to sleep. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she lost Lin Sun's breath, which made Xia Ji feel inexplicably agitated for the first time. After a long time, the little girl fell into a deep sleep. Rumble, the deafening sound of flowing water, echoed in his ears like a clap of thunder. When Lin Sun opened his eyes, he saw that he had appeared in a boundless sea. The blue sea was vast and mighty, intersecting with the sky. Less than 3,000 meters away, there was a mountain peak that pierced the sky. The mountain peak was extremely unique. Huge waves that were like white dragons poured down from the peak of the mountain, rumbling as they crashed into the surface of the sea, causing huge waves to rise. From a distance it was like a water mountain, with hundreds and thousands of waves rushing down from the top, which was spectacular. At the same time, a series of information about passing the test appeared in Lin Sun's mind, which made him instantly understand that if he wanted to pass the test, he must face the falling waves and climb to the top of the mountain. Lin Sun's face suddenly became solemn. Now that he was only at the 4th level of martial realm, it was not difficult to climb the mountain. The difficulty was how to break through the pouring waterfalls. There was no way to dodge. Lin Sun looked carefully. The mountain was extremely high, probably thousands of meters high. Heavy waterfalls fell from the top of the mountain, like roaring water dragons. If he wanted to climb to the top of the mountain, he could not avoid the impact of those waterfalls. There were 108 chances to pass the test, which seemed to be a lot. But Lin Sun was very clear that the more it was, the more difficult it was to pass the test. Lin Sun would never waste these chances to pass the test. I'm afraid the key to this test is how to resist the impact of those waterfalls. If I want to climb the mountain, I must be steady. Once I fall down, it means that I fail the test. Since this test is called body refining, maybe I should start with physical strength. As for spiritual energy, it may not be useful anymore. Lin Sun stepped forward and found that although he couldn't fly, he didn't feel any sinking when he stepped on the sea, as if he was walking on the flat ground. This might be some special arrangement of the spiritual tattoo battlefield. Lin Sun didn't think too much and didn't rush to climb the mountain. Instead, he spent a full hour to carefully observe the mountain around. There was no shortcut. After confirming this fact, Lin Sun also gave up the idea of taking shortcuts and carefully came to the foot of the mountain. The rolling waterfalls, like roaring dragons, poured down from the top of the mountain with a terrible force, splashing thousands of waves. Even standing at the foot of the mountain, Lin Sun felt a suffocating sense of oppression. He tried to run the spiritual energy in his body, and found that it seemed to be imprisoned and couldn't be used at all. This proved even more clearly that this test tested the strength of one's body refinement. Taking a deep breath, Lin Sun raised his head and looked at the magnificent picture. He couldn't help feeling lofty in his heart. How comfortable it would be if he could set foot on this mountain and conquer it. Without hesitation, Lin Sun's flesh, blood, tendons, and bones were like taut bowstrings. His muscles bulged and the strength of his body was condensed to the extreme, like a fully drawn bow. Then he stepped forward and stepped on a rugged rock at the foot of the mountain. Boom! In an instant, a waterfall rushed down and hit Lin Sun hard. Lin Sun staggered and almost flew out. This blow was even stronger than the full blow of a practitioner at the third level of martial realm. Lin Sun was shocked. His toes were like iron claws, and he exerted the strength-exertion skill of 1,000 pounds falling to the surface of the rock to stabilize his body. But even so, he had to bear the impact of the waterfall all the time, which felt like someone with a giant hammer constantly smashing on his body. It was unbearable pain. Lin Sun knew clearly that he couldn't stop here. If it went on like this, he would be finished sooner or later. Gritting his teeth, he stretched out his arms to face the impact of the waterfall. His fingers suddenly inserted into the rock wall, and at the same time, he jumped up and climbed up. Boom! Boom! However, in just a moment, 2 consecutive waterfalls rushed to him. Lin Sun didn't have time to react, and his whole body was knocked out. Fuck! It's too difficult. In the air, Lin Sun couldn't help swearing. The next moment, he returned to the green cloud path of the heaven accessing place. The seeker failed for the first time. At the same time, the hollow and cold voice sounded. Chapter 51. In the room shrouded in darkness, Lin Sun gasped for breath. Every inch of his skin was tingling as if being pricked by needles, and his clothes were soaked in cold sweat. I didn't expect that the second test would be more perverted than I expected, Lin Sun murmured, but he was not discouraged. He had expected that the chance of success in his first attempt was small. What he didn't expect was that he failed in a hurry at the beginning, which was hard for Lin Sun to accept for a while. Glancing at Xia Ji, who was sleeping soundly, Lin Sun didn't feel sleepy at all. He walked out of the room alone, intending to take a cold bath. Walking out of the room, Lin Sun didn't notice that a faint smile appeared at the corner of Xia Ji's mouth, which disappeared in a flash. In her sleep, she felt Lin Sun's existence again. Although she didn't know what happened to Lin Sun, as long as she could feel his breath, Xia Ji felt an unprecedented sense of security. It was already late at night, and the sky was shining with a faint luster. In the courtyard, Lin Sun was soaking in a wooden barrel, feeling the cold feeling of water moistening his skin, and the tingling all over his body faded a lot. The second test will start in 3 days, but I'm afraid I'm doomed to fail according to my current physical strength. Lin Sun leaned against the barrel, staring at the vast night sky in a trance. The water mountain, that stood towering above the ocean, was 3,000 feet tall. The current was rapid, and the waterfall was like a dragon. The force of the impact was so great that it was unimaginable. Wanting to ascend the mountain while facing the waterfall was practically impossible. Lin Sun even doubted that even if he refined his body to the 9th level of martial realm, he wouldn't have much hope to pass this test, let alone now. It's really a headache. Lin Sun couldn't come up with a solution after thinking for a long time, so he couldn't help sighing. What? But soon, Lin Sun suddenly noticed that the strength of his body seemed to be recovering at an incredible speed. Every inch of his skin, tendons, bones, and flesh produced a feeling of numbness, as if they were growing. Lin Sun's mind was immediately attracted. Sensing carefully, he found that there was a faint, strange power in his body, which was constantly integrating with his body. And his body that had been tingling not only recovered quickly, but also became stronger than before. This unexpected change refreshed Lin Sun at once, and he suddenly remembered the situation when he left the heaven accessing place for the first time a few months ago. At that time, he thought he had passed the first test of Green Cloud Path, and the reward he got was only a meditating magic. Who would have thought that even the wounds on his heart vessel and 4 acupoints would not exist? Instead, he had condensed 4 spiritual vortexes. Not only that, but also from that time, his thin and weak body was greatly improved. Could it be that every time I enter the heaven accessing place, I can improve my body imperceptibly? Or perhaps, the changes in my body are related to my attempt to break through the barrier of body refinement? Of in Lin, in, he and he of the in, he of in, and the body of Lin, of heart, he in, and of in and. Just now, the stinging pain all over his body was the aftereffect of being hit by the waterfall. But now, it seemed like it was also a kind of training for his body? It was possible. When Lin Sun thought that this test was called body refining, he could only use his physical strength instead of spiritual energy. He felt more and more that the faint strange power in his body might come from the mill waterfalls. This discovery cheered up Lin Sun, who was originally depressed. He hurriedly dried his body and put on clean clothes. Standing in the courtyard, he began to practice marching boxing. Hoo! 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 The wind generated by his fists shook the air. Feeling his physical strength carefully, Lin Sun found that his strength had improved a lot. In the past, he could only make the air vibrate with a full force punch, but now, he could do it with a casual strike. From the looks of it, even if I fail, I can't give up on those opportunities to challenge the trials. If I can improve my physique time and time again, my strength will only become stronger. Correspondingly, the difficulty of the trials will gradually become easier for me. The more Lin Sun thought about it, the clearer his thoughts became. That should be it. This is the real purpose of body refining in the second test of Green Cloud Path. It is to train my physique. Even if I fail many times, I can still face failure more calmly. Like the first test of the Green Cloud Path, it seems that it is only to comprehend and grasp the mystery of the flowing light spiritual tattoo. Who would have thought that the real mystery of the flowing light spiritual tattoo is the secret of practicing the meditating magic? It seems that I have underestimated the trials on Green Cloud Path. Who can imagine that behind each trial there is an unimaginable mystery? At this moment, Lin Sun felt that he was suddenly enlightened. Standing alone in the boundless night, his eyes were as bright as stars. Another 3 days passed. At night, Lin Sun entered the heaven accessing place and tried the mill waterfalls again. Because of his stronger physique, Lin soon climbed more than 6 meters high this time before he was smashed out by the torrents of the 3 waterfalls. Compared with this failure, Lin soon cared more about the change in his physique. After careful perception, he found that his previous speculation was right. After this test, his physique became stronger again. Lin soon calculated that if he tried every 3 days, 108 times would take him 3 or 2 or 4 days, which was almost a year. If he could improve his physique every time, the benefits would be immeasurable. More than that, he could also refine his physique in different ways during daily cultivation. With such superposition, he could imagine how strong his physique would be at that time. All this also rekindled Lin soon's fighting spirit to conquer the second test of Green Cloud Path. It's a pity that I have to go to Green Sun Tribe because I have accumulated too many goods. Otherwise, I would like to spend all my time on cultivation. That night, Lin Sun sighed. He had promised Shirao Tianren, the village head, that he would set off for Green Sun Tribe more than 2,000 miles away tomorrow. The next morning, at the entrance of Feiyun village, Lin Sun waved goodbye to the villagers, riding a tall and handsome scaled horse. "I'll wait for you to come back." Standing beside the scaled horse, Shirao Ji raised her little face and said seriously, "If you don't come back, I'll definitely go to find you." "Okay." Lin Sun smiled, which was indescribably brilliant in the morning sunshine. "Nay." The scaly horse let out a long neigh and galloped away with Lin Sun on its 4 hooves. Shirao Ji gazed at it for a long time until Lin Sun's figure disappeared from her sight. Then she withdrew her gaze and returned home alone. Her young and delicate figure looked very lonely. Some villagers wanted to invite Shirao Ji to their homes. After all, Lin Sun was gone and no one would cook for her, which was too pitiful for a little girl. Shirao Tianren, the village head, stopped them and shook his head. "There's no need to do that. Shirao Ji is different from others. We just need to take good care of her." The villagers thought about it and agreed with him. Shirao Ji was very unique, totally different from other children. Even Lin Sun was no match for her. Coupled with the indifference and alienation that Shirao Ji exuded, none of the villagers dared to approach her rashly. "I just hope little brother Lin Sun can come back as soon as possible." Shirao Tianren took a deep breath and murmured. The boundless mountains, like the backbone of the world, stretched up and down, dotted with mountains and rivers. As far as the eye could see, it was desolate everywhere. This was the 3,000 Mountains, located in the southwest border of Xiao Empire. It had been called the Natural Moat since ancient times. It was said that there were many ferocious beasts and numerous dangerous areas in the 3,000 Mountains. Once an ordinary person set foot in it, he would definitely die. Rumble, the scaled horse galloped, kicking up dust. On its back was an animal skin bag more than 3 meters high, weighing at least hundreds of kilograms. Inside were some fierce beast skins, bones, sharp claws, and other materials. There were also some spirit herbs and spirit materials that grew deep in the mountains. Of course, compared with these visible goods, the goods in Lin Sun's storage ring were the most valuable. That was 150 kilograms of Feiyun fire copper. It was not an ore, but a refined pure Feiyun fire copper of amazing value. Riding on the scaled horse, Lin Sun didn't rush at full speed. The 3,000 Mountains were too dangerous, with dangerous mountains and rivers everywhere. One careless move and he would run into danger. In addition, this was the first time Lin Sun went to the Green Sun Tribe alone. He only knew that he would arrive at the destination in about 3 days if he went all the way to the north. As for the specific road conditions, he had no idea at all. Under such circumstances, he naturally had to be more cautious. Fortunately, there was no other danger until noon, except for some beasts along the way. The noon sun was scorching. Seeing that the scaled horse was already out of breath, Lin Sun didn't go on. He slowed down his pace and found a dense forest, where he dismounted and took a rest. Lin Sun took out some dried beast meat and chewed it to replenish his strength. In his mind, He was thinking about what to do when he arrived at the Green Sun tribe. After 30 minutes, seeing that the scaled horse had enough rest, Lin soon immediately mounted it and planned to continue his journey. Boom! Just at this moment, the earth in the distance suddenly shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. From a distant mountain peak, huge rocks poured down with a rumble. At the same time, there was a burst of beast roaring in the forest, full of horror. Even the scaly horse he was riding was restless and restless. Lin soon felt a strong sense of danger in his heart. He looked around, but found nothing at all. What was going on? Right at this moment, a bright golden light suddenly charged out from the extremely distant mountains. The light was dazzling, and one could faintly see that it seemed to be an enormous golden claw. Chapter 52. The giant claw, which looked like it was made of gold, rose up and covered the sky. At that moment, even Lin Sun was frightened and felt cold all over. What the hell was that? But just a moment later, the giant golden claw disappeared, the golden light in the sky faded away, and everything returned to normal. The earth was no longer shaking. That scene was so abrupt that Lin Sun couldn't imagine why such a shocking scene would suddenly happen. Until he calmed down, Lin Sun drove the scaly horse forward, but he was more careful than before. The 3,000 mountains were really dangerous and unpredictable. He had encountered such a horrible scene when he was less than 1,000 miles away from Feiyun village. It was most likely an unimaginable fierce beast. Dozens of miles ahead, Lin Sun saw the traces of the mountain collapse. Many rocks, ranging from tens of thousands of kilograms to hundreds of thousands of kilograms, were scattered among the mountains. This area was also very creepy. The ground was scorched black and barren, which formed a sharp contrast with the luxuriant forest in the distance. That place was full of vigor and vegetation, but here it was dead silent and everything was barren, appearing desolate and forbidding. Lin soon remembered that the giant golden claw he just saw came from this area, but he couldn't tell where it came from. After arriving here, the scaly horse began to be restless again, its 4 hooves trembling, as if it was about to fall to the ground. Lin Sun's heart also palpitated and his hair stood on end. He didn't dare to stay any longer, so he chose a roundabout way and carefully bypassed this area. It wasn't until he ran for dozens of miles that the palpitations in his heart disappeared, and the scaly horse also returned to its former tame and calm state. Weird. Lin Sun pondered for a long time, but still couldn't figure out the reason. He shook his head and continued on his way. Only in the evening, when night was about to descend, did a surging river appear before them. It was grand and powerful, the waves surging violently as it surged between the mountains and lofty ridges. Under the setting sun, the water was dyed orange, like burning blood, which was quite spectacular. Lin soon got off the horse and came to the river bank. He found a safe place near a pile of rocks, planning to rest here for the night and set off tomorrow morning. He caught 2 fish from the river, set up a bonfire, and began to prepare dinner for himself. The scaly horse was lying lazily on one side, snoring. The atmosphere was exceptionally peaceful. At the same time, a group of people were dashing hastily a few tens of kilometers away. The person in the lead was a young man in an embroidered robe. He had narrow eyes, a hawk nose, and a gloomy and ruthless bearing. Beside him were over a dozen experts, and every single one of them was extraordinary. This was especially true of a gray-robed old man. Although his figure was emaciated, when his eyes opened and closed, violet electricity flowed about, and his aura was like an abyss, shocking to the extreme. However, at this moment, the old man's face was a little pale, especially on his shoulder, there was a shocking wound. His skin and flesh were split open, and his bones were faintly visible. Although the wound had stopped bleeding a long time ago, strands of golden light were still burning, causing the wound to be unable to heal. Haha, it's all thanks to Elder Xingting that we were able to snatch that treasure from that bastard. When we return, I'll definitely ask my father for a reward on your behalf." The young man in front suddenly laughed out loud, his voice filled with excitement and pride. "Young master is too kind. This old man doesn't deserve it." The gray-robed elder forced a smile. His face was pale, and the wound on his shoulder was still being burned by the golden flames. It was clear that he was suppressing this pain, and his brows were tightly furrowed. "Elder Xingting, are your injuries really fine?" the young man asked with concern. "Although the power of the true flame of the mysterious sparrow is extremely vicious, as long as you give me some time, I'll be able to destroy it. However, I can't fly anymore, which delays your journey." Xingting, the gray-robed elder, was obviously very respectful to the young man, and his words were quite humble. "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it takes some time. What's more, if I fly, I'm afraid that I'll be found by that bastard again. If it catches up with me, there will be endless troubles in the future." Speaking of this, the young man suddenly thought of something and couldn't help laughing proudly again. "Elder Xingting, do you think this treasure is the peerless treasure mentioned by the flamen on the observatory of the Forbidden City?" Xingting thought for a moment and said, "Young master, the origin of this treasure is quite strange. It should not belong to that bastard. According to my speculation, maybe your guess is right." The young man laughed and said, "No matter what, many top figures in the Forbidden City have come to the 3,000 mountains because of this peerless treasure. It can be said to be a gathering of wind and clouds, attracting the attention of the whole world. But now that this treasure has been obtained by us, their efforts are destined to be in vain." Xingting frowned and reminded, "Young master, please be careful with your words. This matter must not be publicized, or it will be coveted by others." The young man nodded repeatedly. "Yes, Elder Xingting is right." After a pause, his eyes suddenly flashed a touch of coldness. He glanced at the powerful followers around him and said, "Did you hear what Elder Xingting said? From today on, no one is allowed to mention this matter again. If this matter is leaked, don't blame me for being ruthless." Those followers hurriedly promised. Before long, a mighty long river appeared in their sight. "Young master, it's getting late. Why don't we rest here and continue our journey tomorrow?" Xingting suddenly said. "Okay." The young man pondered for a moment before agreeing. Among their group, Xingting had the highest cultivation base, possessing Sea of Soul realm battle power. However, he had suffered quite a bit of injuries. Since he requested to rest, they naturally couldn't neglect him. "Young master, there seems to be someone over there." At this time, a follower said and pointed to the opposite bank of the river. In the distance they could see a bonfire burning. Immediately, the young man and others became nervous. In the 3,000 mountains, those who dared to walk in it were absolutely not ordinary people. What was more, many top figures had come for the peerless treasure. If they encountered one of them, the situation would be a little bad. "Don't panic, everyone. It's just a young man on the 4th level of martial realm." Xingting glanced around and instantly found some clues, saying carelessly, "Oh, let's go and have a look." The young man suddenly felt relaxed and led the others to cross the river with lightness skill. As Xingting said, it was a young man about 13 or 14 years old, dressed in old coarse linen clothes. Although he looked clean and tidy, he looked too shabby in the eyes of the young man and others. This young man, of course, was Lin Sun. Just now, he also noticed that someone was approaching. Now seeing such a group of people approaching, he couldn't help but be secretly surprised. If he didn't see it wrong, almost all of these people had the cultivation of Gang Spirit Realm, and they were surrounded by wisps of Gang Spirit Chi. It was absolutely true. Even the spirit revealed by the gray-clothed old man was more horrible. Lin Sun had to be vigilant when such a group of people appeared in the wilderness. "Oh, it seems that he is a little native living in the 3,000 mountains." The young man glanced at Lin Sun, smiled frivolously, and waved his hand disdainfully. "Little guy, we all have a rest here. If you don't mind, you can leave now. I'm in a good mood today, so I won't embarrass you." The group of followers burst into laughter. The gray-clothed old man frowned, and finally didn't say anything more. A young man didn't deserve too much attention. Thank you, everyone," Lin soon stammered with a look of awe and trepidation. Then he led the scaly horse and ran away. Looking at Lin Soon's frightened look, the young man and his followers couldn't help laughing again. Sure enough, he is a little bumpkin who has never seen the world. Child's light words scared him away. "Ha!" A follower flattered, which made the young man couldn't help laughing and said, "This little bumpkin is smart. He knows that if he doesn't leave, he will definitely suffer some hardships. But he is too cowardly and spineless." "Child, you're wrong. No matter how spineless this little bumpkin is, he can only retreat with his tail between his legs when he sees you." The followers flattered like a tide, making the young man laugh again and again. Only Xingting frowned, but he couldn't do anything about it. His child was the eldest son of Lu Wujuan, the governor of the southwestern province of the empire. His status was noble, but his temperament was so domineering that even Xingting dared not say anything. They didn't notice that in a place dozens of miles away, Lin Sun, who was running in a panic, suddenly stopped and climbed a big tree. His eyes were like cold stars, looking at the bank of the river in the distance. At this time, there was no trace of fear on Lin Sun's face. He became calm and indifferent, holding a huge white bone bough in his hand. Just now, Lin Sun was humiliated and driven away. Although he seemed to retreat, he was actually very angry in his heart. But he had no choice. Compared with those people, his current cultivation was really not good enough. If he fought recklessly, it would be like hitting a stone with an egg, and he would die in vain. "I really don't want to give up," Lin Sun murmured. He knew that even if he waited here, he couldn't find a chance to teach those people a lesson. But he was extremely unwilling to swallow his anger and leave. At this time, the sky and the earth suddenly shook in the distance. At the same time, a golden light rushed up from a very far place, piercing the darkness and extremely dazzling. That was the towering beast claw that he had seen before. Lin Sun's eyes narrowed at once, and then a strange smile appeared on his lips. The place where the towering beast claw appeared seemed to be the riverside just now. Those guys were going to be out of luck. Lin Sun almost laughed out. It was really God who opened his eyes. He suddenly jumped down from the tree and approached there like a gust of wind. Lin Sun wanted to see whether those guys would be in trouble or not. At the same time, he was really curious about what kind of horrible beast the towering beast claw belonged to. Soon, Lin Sun stopped and looked shocked. In his field of vision, he finally saw a huge golden beast, like a mountain, galloping under the night sky. Its whole body was shining with golden light, illuminating the whole world. Chapter 53. The golden light was like fire, illuminating the world. The giant beast was as huge as a mountain. It galloped in the air like a fierce beast from ancient times. It could cover the sun and the moon and break mountains and rivers with its roar. Although it was far away, Lin Sun still felt a stinging pain in his eyes. He trembled all over and his soul was inexplicably oppressed. It could be vaguely seen that the giant beast was like a deer or a horse. Its head was like a dragon's head, and its tail was like a rainbow. Its whole body was covered with golden fur, and its 4 hooves were stepping on blazing light. It galloped in the air with overflowing golden light and billions of divine flames. It roared and poured down, burning the mountain and turning the ancient forest into ashes. It was extremely terrible. Its opponent, holding a spear, kept waving it, and emitting terrible spear shadows and cold light. Obviously, he couldn't bear it and was suppressed to dodge. Lin soon judged in an instant that it was the gray-robed old man in the group of people who were fighting against the giant beast just now. It was them. Lin Sun's smile was weird. It was absolutely a lie to say that he was not gloating. But when he saw the power of the old man in gray fighting in the air, Lin Sun couldn't help but be surprised. This was another sea spirit realm existence. Together with the man in green robe, Shai Yutong, the barbarian and Shurshuan, the young master of keystone business, this was the fourth sea spirit realm existence Lin Sun had seen. It could be imagined how many top figures were attracted to the 3,000 mountains for the so-called peerless treasure. But these had nothing to do with Lin Sun. Compared with the sea spirit realm, his cultivation was still not good enough, and he couldn't get involved in this storm at all. Soon, Lin Sun's eyes were attracted by the golden beast. He secretly speculated that the golden beast claw he saw at noon was caused by the old man and his companions. But what on earth did they do to make this giant beast so furious? Boom! The earth shook and the light rain splashed like falling meteors, smashing the earth, burning the ancient forest, destroying the mountains, and scorching the earth inch by inch. This scene was too terrifying, and once one was affected by it, one was bound to die without a doubt. Lin Sun didn't dare to stay any longer, so he turned around and left. After confirming that the old man and his companions were really in trouble, his anger had been released. If he didn't leave now, he would be risking his life. Bang! However, when Lin Sun ran for less than 1 mile, he heard a rapid sound of something breaking through the air, and then a sound of a heavy object hitting the ground came from the forest not far away. Then, a series of painful moans were heard. Lin Sun was startled. This voice was so familiar. He carefully approached and saw a badly mutilated figure lying on the ground, covered in blood, looking extremely miserable. Even so, Lin Sun could still tell from his clothes that he was the young child of that group of people. Lin Sun was overjoyed. God seemed to favor him today. Not only did he send a giant beast to trample on those people to avenge him, but he also sent the culprit to him. Of course, Lin Sun knew that he was just imagining things. He turned around and saw that the battle in the distance was still ongoing. If Lin Sun guessed right, the young child was thrown out of the battlefield by the gray-robed old man, in case the young child, who seemed to be of extremely noble status, was killed. Unfortunately, this fellow had landed right in front of him. "Child, we meet again." Lin Sun walked forward with a smile. At this moment, the young man was dying and seriously injured. Even with the cultivation of Gang Spirit Realm, he was no different from a disabled person. "You!" the young man gasped and opened his bloody eyes. When he saw Lin Sun clearly, he immediately shouted, "Little native, take me away from here. When I'm safe, I promise you will enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future." His voice was rapid and hoarse. In the end, he even coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood, looking extremely miserable. "Child, I don't want glory and wealth." Lin Sun shook his head and still said with a smile, "I'm already very satisfied to see you like this. Goodbye." Saying this, he turned around and left. "Wait a minute," the young child cried. "Little brother, what do you want to promise to help me once? Tell me and I'll promise you everything." Lin Sun turned around and looked at the young child's eager eyes. He sighed and said, "Child Lu, you occupied the magpie's nest with poison and drove me away. It's already very benevolent of me not to kill you now. Do you want to push your luck?" Lu Yukuan cried, "Little brother, it's all my fault just now. I apologize to you. I only ask you to be magnanimous and save me once." There was a hint of pleading in his voice. But at the end of his words, he suddenly coughed violently and trembled all over. Suddenly, he collapsed to the ground and his breath became extremely weak. Lin Sun pondered for a moment and stepped forward, saying, "Well, there's no great hatred between us. It's okay to save you once." He squatted down and reached out to help Lu Yukuan up. Whoosh! At this moment, Lu Yukuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a touch of ruthlessness and coldness. His originally weak body suddenly stood up. At the same time, he shook his arm and clasped Lin Sun's neck. A dagger appeared in his hand and was pressed against Lin Sun's throat. Lu Yukuan laughed grimly. Little bastard. Be obedient or else this sword will take your life. Lin Sun didn't move, but there was no trace of panic on his face. Instead, he laughed. Sure enough, I knew people like you wouldn't have good intentions even if you asked for help. Lu Yukuan said coldly, What do you mean? Bang. At this moment, the muscles of Lin Sun's shoulder blades suddenly expanded, releasing a huge shock force. In an instant, Lu Yukuan's arm around his neck was shaken away. At the same time, he tilted his head back and twisted his wrist in a strange way. He clasped Lu Yukuan's arm tightly and twisted it violently. With a crack, Lu Yukuan's arm was dislocated and his joints were dislocated. The dagger in his hand suddenly lost its strength and fell to the ground. With a snap, Lin Sun turned over and slapped Lu Yukuan in the face, causing him to howl miserably and lose several teeth. How could it be you? Lu Yukuan was horrified. How could he have expected that Lin Sun, who had been subdued by him, would turn defeat into victory in just a moment? All this was due to Lin Sun's practice of separating tendons and dislocating bones from Shia solstice. In the case of close combat, this kind of skill in using physical strength was absolutely incredible and impossible to guard against. Unfortunately, Lu Yukuan only regarded Lin Sun as a practitioner on the 4th level of martial realm. He had been guarding against Lin Sun's use of spiritual energy, but neglected Lin Sun's terrible physical strength. Child Lu, I saved you out of kindness. Is this how you treat me? Lin Sun sighed and picked up the dagger. Without any hesitation, he pierced Lu Yukuan's throat with one blow, and blood burst out. Looking at the shock, resentment and unwillingness in Lu Yukuan's eyes, Lin Sun smiled and said, Child Lu, although the little native is inconspicuous, he has a clear distinction between love and hate. Once he has the chance, he will not hesitate to kill a scum like you. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame yourself, can't you? Lu Yukuan's lips made a sound, and finally fell to the ground and died unwillingly. Lin Sun put away his smile and looked back at the distance. Seeing that the battle there had already ended, Lin Sun was shocked. He quickly searched Lu Yukuan's body, but only found a purple jade belt that he was wearing. It should be a storage spiritual weapon. Lin Sun didn't look at it and hurried away. Not long after, the scaly horse galloped, carrying Lin Sun's figure to the distance in the night, and soon disappeared. He had to leave as soon as possible. Lin Sun was very clear that Lu Yukuan's identity was absolutely not simple since he was followed by a sea spirit realm practitioner as a guard. Once such a child with a strong background died, it would inevitably cause a lot of trouble. Roar, Lin Sun, riding on the scaly horse, was running wildly. Suddenly, he heard an earth-shaking roar coming from a distance. The scaly horse was so frightened that it whined and became restless. Turning his head, Lin Sun saw a huge golden fierce beast roaring in the distant sky, its voice full of anger. Endless flames poured down like a rainbow from the sky, burning the world as if it had turned into a fiery hell. It was terrible. Lin Sun felt lucky in his heart. If he had left a little later and stayed in front of Lu Yukuan's body, he would have been doomed to be affected and die. But Lin Sun couldn't judge whether the gray-clothed old man and his group had died in the battle. Anyway, I must leave this place as soon as possible. Lin Sun took a deep breath and urged the restless scaly horse to continue running wildly. Golden Flame Beast. It's this beast, could it be? How many years has it been? Who would have thought that there was a golden flame beast hidden in the 3,000 mountains? This is a strange beast with a trace of blood relationship with the ancient divine beast, Fire Kylan. It's really not simple. I underestimated the 3,000 mountains before. It's the first time that I've found traces of this beast in nearly 1,000 years. Let's go and have a look. Maybe the appearance of this beast has something to do with the peerless treasure. At the same time, in different areas of the 3,000 mountains, the shocking roar of the golden flame beast also attracted the attention of many top practitioners who came to look for the peerless treasure. For example, Shai Yutong, the 9th young master of the Xie family, Shi Xuan, the 1st young master of Keystone business, and so on. This night was doomed to not be peaceful. It was the same for Lin Sun and those practitioners who gathered in the 3,000 mountains because of the rumor of a peerless treasure. But Lin Sun didn't know that it didn't take long for Lu Yuquan's charred body to be found, which caused a great disturbance. This was the eldest son of Lu Wujuan, the governor of the southwestern province of the empire. Who was Lu Wujuan? He was a well-known strong practitioner of Tao Insight realm in the empire, and he was also famous in the cultivation world of the empire. Lu Wujuan was a brave and iron-blooded soldier. He had been in charge of the southwestern province of the empire for nearly 50 years. He was famous and powerful. Lu Yuquan died in the 3,000 mountains. As his father, how could Lu Wujuan let it go? Chapter 54. When dawn was about to break, the scaly horse couldn't bear it any more after running all night. It staggered and collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. Lin Sun turned over and landed on the ground steadily. Looking at the sweaty, scaly horse, he couldn't help but feel a little ashamed. He was so sorry that he had exhausted the horse while he was running. "Brother horse, I'm sorry." Lin Sun took out some spiritual materials and gave them to the scaly horse. Seeing the horse chewing happily, Lin Sun smiled slightly. The scaly horse was a kind of fierce beast, but once it was tamed, its temperament would become extremely docile. Lin Sun couldn't live without the scaly horse when running between Green Sun Tribe and Feiyun Village in the future. Lin Sun also found a place to rest. He took out the spirit refining liquid and gulped it down. Then he took out the purple jade belt peeled from Lu Yuquan. This was a precious spiritual storage device. The belt was not only engraved with exquisite and dense spiritual tattoos, but also inlaid with fine pearls and jades. It was extraordinarily luxurious. However, in Lin Sun's view, these decorations were too flashy. If it were him, he would never make a spiritual storage device so dazzling, for it would only attract thieves' attention. He opened the purple jade belt, and the storage space inside suddenly appeared. To Lin Sun's surprise, there was only a bronze chest of 1 square foot in such a large space. Apart from that, there was nothing else. Slightly disappointed, Lin Sun couldn't help but look at the bronze chest. The box showed a kind of antique color accumulated over the years. The 4 corners of the box were engraved with 4 patterns: cloud pattern, landscape pattern, exotic beast, sun and moon. Around the box there were mysterious spiritual patterns, which released an obscure and palpitating aura. This seems to be a kind of spiritual tattoo formation specially used for sealing. Lin Sun's black eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. Based on his knowledge of spiritual tattoos, although he couldn't judge the name of those spiritual tattoos, he could roughly tell from its breath that it should be a kind of sealing power. Only spiritual tattooists could inscribe a spiritual tattoo formation. Who would spend so much effort to inscribe a spiritual tattoo formation specially used for sealing on a bronze chest? This price was too high. However, it could be determined from this that this bronze chest was definitely made to seal some extremely precious treasures. Thinking of this, Lin Sun's heart shook. At first glance, he knew that Lu Yuquan's identity was not simple. They were chased by the golden beast tonight. Was it because of the things sealed in the bronze chest that caused all this to happen? What was hidden in this bronze chest? Lin Sun continued to investigate. After a while, he couldn't help but gasp. There was an extremely terrible spiritual tattoo restriction at the opening of the bronze chest. The so-called spiritual tattoo restriction was a spiritual formation used for sealing. Those who could arrange spiritual tattoo restriction were definitely powerful figures with the title of spiritual tattoo master. A spiritual tattoo grandmaster was a transcendent figure who was even more distinguished than a spiritual tattooist. The bronze box was not only engraved with a special spiritual tattoo formation for sealing, but also engraved with a spiritual tattoo restriction at the opening. The value of this bronze box alone could be regarded as an immeasurable and amazing figure. What on earth was the treasure sealed in the bronze chest at this time? It was a pity that Lin Sun couldn't open it. With the existence of the spiritual tattoo restriction, even a spiritual tattoo master couldn't do anything if he didn't know the real mystery of the spiritual tattoo restriction, let alone him. Well, it won't be too late to open it later when I have a chance. Lin Sun thought for a long time and finally gave up. His current mastery of spiritual tattoos could only be regarded as a little better than other spiritual apprentices, but he couldn't be regarded as a qualified spiritual tattooist, let alone a spiritual tattoo master. The standard of becoming a spiritual tattooist was also very simple. One had to inscribe a spiritual tattoo formation alone. However, it was not so easy to inscribe a spiritual tattoo formation. At least, it was difficult to do this without the cultivation of Gang spirit realm. The reason lay in the spiritual power and soul power. The spiritual power and soul perception of a practitioner in martial realm were not enough to support the inscribing of a spiritual tattoo formation. Of course, this was in a general sense. There were still some special cases in the world. For example, Lin Sun knew that Master Lu once inadvertently mentioned after getting drunk that when he was on the 8th level of martial realm, he could skillfully inscribe a complete spiritual tattoo formation and became one of the youngest spiritual tattooists at that time. Since Master Lu could do it, Lin Sun thought that as long as he worked hard, he could also do it. Putting aside his messy thoughts, Lin Sun took out the bronze chest. Boom! To his surprise, the bronze chest was extremely heavy, at least 5,000 kilograms of force. As soon as it was taken out, it smashed a hole in the ground. But the more it was like this, the more Lin Sun concluded that there must be some great treasure sealed in the chest. Without hesitation, he moved the bronze chest into his storage ring and let out a long sigh of relief. After resting for 2 hours, the scaly horse had recovered its strength. Lin Sun identified the direction and set off again. There were no more dangerous storms along the way. When he passed by a crater, Lin Sun deliberately stopped and threw the purple jade belt into the boiling lava. Lin Sun would not carry this thing with him. He didn't even touch the jewels inlaid on the belt. This was to prevent any future troubles. Precious as this thing was, it was Lu Yuquan's personal belongings after all. It was hard to guarantee that there was no unique breath left on it. If it was found by the power behind Lu Yuquan, there would be endless troubles. Sunset Plain. This was a plain distributed among the 3,000 mountains, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. To the north, it led to Donglin Town on the southwest border of Xiao Empire. A river flowed down along the mountain range, winding around the plain like a jade belt, and irrigating a plentiful spiritual field. Green Sun Tribe was located on this sunset plain. Tracing back to history, Green Sun Tribe was originally a barbarian tribe in the mountains. But with the expansion of Xiao Empire, Green Sun Tribe gradually integrated into the territory of the empire. Until now, it was rare to see real barbarian descendants of Green Sun Tribe. Although it was called a tribe, it was now like a bustling town, a pivotal fortress between Xiao Empire, Donglin Town, and the 3,000 mountains. Most of the goods such as fur, bones, spiritual herbs, and spiritual materials produced in the 3,000 mountains would be gathered in Green Sun Tribe and then flowed into Donglin Town. Similarly, because of the special geographical location, many chambers of commerce from all over the empire and practitioners who ventured to the 3,000 mountains would also choose Green Sun Tribe as a foothold. It was for this reason that the prosperity of Green Sun Tribe today was forged. It was 10 o'clock in the evening, and the sunset glow was like fire. A scaly horse came to the front of Green Sun Tribe with dust. In order to resist the attacks of the fierce beasts in the mountains, the Green Sun Tribe had built thick and tall city walls around it. The north and south walls each had a gate for pedestrians to pass through. As the scaly horse approached, the guards stationed on both sides of the gate saw clearly that it was a 13 or 14-year-old boy in gray riding on the horse, carrying an animal skin bag as tall as a man. 3 copper coins are required to enter the city. A guard came forward and said, "Okay." Lin Sun dismounted from the horse, took out 3 copper coins with a smile, and handed them over. The guard nodded and waved his hand to let Lin Sun pass. There was no strict order in the Green Sun tribe. Just like a temporary place to settle down, new faces appeared and old faces disappeared every day. No one would be willing to stay here for the rest of their lives. After all, compared with the prosperity of Xiao Empire, the Green Sun tribe in the 3,000 mountains was still far behind. It was too backward and dangerous, and they had to guard against the attacks of fierce beasts in the mountains at all times. Soon, Lin Sun led the scaly horse into the gate and disappeared in the crowded street. "Go and tell the shopkeeper of Wu business that the Mount of Lian Rufeng from Feiyun village has appeared. Tell him everything you saw just now." Watching Lin Sun leave, the guard who had been collecting the copper coins suddenly waved his hand to summon a black-clothed man with a protruding mouth and ape-like cheeks, and whispered to him, "Okay." The black-clothed man nodded, turned around and hurried away. Wu business has been waiting for so many days, but only a young man came. It seems that if they want to know the news of Wu Henshui, they have to start with this young man. The guard thought for a while and then shook his head. These things had nothing to do with him. He was only responsible for delivering some news. Lin Sun didn't know that he had been secretly watched as soon as he entered the city gate. At this time, he was walking along a spacious street in the bustling crowd. There were many people and it was very lively. Strong laborers in animal skins were carrying bags of goods. Some peddlers and pawns were peddling some mountain specialties on both sides of the street, including spiritual herbs, animal skins, and ores. From time to time, merchants in brocade clothes could be seen running wildly in the street in their carriages. There were also practitioners carrying weapons on their backs, hurrying through the crowd. On both sides of the street, there were rows of stone houses, restaurants, medicine shops, weapon shops, inns, chambers of commerce, and brothels. As the saying goes, small as a sparrow is, it has all the vital organs. Although the Green Sun tribe was not large, it was lively. All kinds of people shuttled back and forth, forming a bustling scene. It was the first time for Lin Sun to enter a bustling area where people gathered in his life. His emotions were somewhat complicated, including excitement, curiosity, and admiration. Growing up in the mine prison, Lin Sun's first place in Xiao Empire was the poor and remote Feiyun village. No matter how shrewd Lin Sun was, he was only a 13-year-old boy after all. In the face of such prosperity, he could not help but be in a trance. Just the Green Sun tribe alone was so lively and prosperous. If he really entered the city of Xiao Empire, how prosperous would it be?